TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here. Actually, two friendly neighborhood philosophers here, and one who's actually significantly more active in philosophy.
You, obviously.
No, that would be you.
The true David S.
I got a PhD. I have not touched it since then. No, I've done some presentations at philosophy conferences and stuff, but basically, I have not been too involved in recent years. But you have.
Yeah, no, I've been trying to really focus on theological dilemmas and a lot of philosophical issues with Islam, and I'm really excited to talk about the huge number of issues that Jake exposed. It's actually really bad. After this debate that you did with Jake, I ended up making even more dilemmas than I wrote in my book, and so now I actually have to make a third edition with like at least another 50.
Yeah, I thought. Oh, yeah, let me break it down for everyone. So I have David S.'s book, The Death of Allah. You want to show everyone?
Yes.
The Death of Allah. You're covering up the subtitle. What's wrong? 100 Dilemmas That Disprove Islamic Theism. So he covers all kinds of things. I read the last 10 because those I thought would actually be relevant to the debate with Jake as far as going in a direction that we normally don't go in with the Islamic dilemma. So we normally present the Islamic dilemma, some version of, hey, the Quran confirms our scriptures but contradicts our scriptures, and so the Quran's got a problem there. But you can actually go in a significantly more philosophical and theological direction and bring out additional problems. And so I normally would have spent a crossfire sort of just going through Quran verses and saying, what does Allah mean? Oh, he really means it. Okay, why didn't he say that then? But Jake was debating multiple people on the Islamic dilemma. So I was like, okay, well, I'll run some of these issues that come up in David S.'s book by you to get feedback from an actual Muslim. And then we'll see what David S. here can do with that stuff, that. So if anyone's not familiar with David S. here.
Yeah.
It's my cousin from the Cigarra Cartel. His name is
Claro
David
que
too.
sí, man. Claro que sí. Esto es David Ceguera Real. I'm the real one, dude.
Sí.
Taquitos.
Burritos.
That's right.
Let's see. And someone said, let's see. Just the 10 dilemmas. Quran is riddled with dilemmas. His book is actually 100 dilemmas, but he covers a bunch of different topics. So the last 10, I'd say probably 7 or 8 of the last 10 are pretty relevant to discussions of the Islamic dilemma. But again, going in a kind of completely different direction from what we normally go into, uncover some deeper problems. And Jake gave some surprising answers. So we're going to check out my cross-examination of Jake, and then David S. here is going to break down some additional dilemmas and possibly expose poor Jake as a complete heretic, as if we haven't already exposed him already for rejecting everything that Allah says about the previous scriptures in the Quran. So, David S., we're going to have a problem that we're both David S's here.
That's true.
But
that's true.
yeah, hey, before we get started, why don't you share some things about yourself and whatever information you want people to have. Also, everyone, I have a link to his channel, which he's been historically pretty lazy about, but I'm hoping he'll jump into a live stream and be like, well, this is fun, so I got to do more cool stuff.
I'm going to try to.
Yeah. So why don't you break down a little bit about the sort of things that you're interested in? And guys, I have a link to his channel. You can subscribe over there, and I have a link to his book, The Death of Allah. And if you're not sure whether you want it, wait till we get into some of the arguments, and then you'll see kind of how he what the sorts of stuff he deals with.
Yeah. Yeah, name's David, and I have the YouTube channel Be the Iron, which is telling people to be the iron that sharpens another, based off Proverbs 27:17.
Oh, so you don't mean like the iron that's flattening people's clothes?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
No, because I want to straighten people out. Don't get me wrong. So I guess you could say that too. But I was
Hang on,
trying to go for
hang on. Pause real quick. Pause real quick. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just remembered when you were saying more dilemmas came up.
Yeah.
You said you were watching Jake and more dilemmas came up. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. I spotted one that would fit right in with your 10 chapters there on the Islamic dilemma, and I talked about it, and that it's that by willing the Quran, willing the previous scriptures to be corrupted, he was making his argument circular. So he could have made it like a not very good argument, but he chose to make it. Circular. He deliberately chose, according to Jake, to make his argument circular. So I was thinking that could potentially be put in the form of a dilemma there. But anyway, just wanted to point that out. Oh, sorry to interrupt. All right, go on.
Actually, I would have considered that the seventh one because my presentation has 6 major ones, and I was gonna wait because I thought you made a meta argument there about Allah. But oddly enough, so I write a lot of books on theology and philosophy from my time in seminary. I've got narcolepsy, and so that's why you have sleepy seminarian books behind me. Narcolepsy, so I'm just kind of always at the point of exhaustion. But as long as I'm talking about God, I actually don't have any of the effects of my condition, so I don't really need any of my medication as long as I just talk about Jesus. I also make some books for students, people in college who are just trying to learn how to evangelize. So I've got Faith That Speaks over in the corner there to help people learn how to evangelize. And I train college students and high school students on how to share their faith in an effective way. Oddly enough, the original form of The Death of Allah was actually
tiny little book.
It was under 70 pages, very small print on each, or very big print on each page. Wasn't much, but so many Muslims responded on Instagram to the one dilemma in this book of 10, because a lot of them were arguing about how to deal with it, that I was like, wow, all of their responses show that there's other dilemmas I haven't covered. So I started to put all of their dilemmas and all of the issues that they brought up against each other into the second edition of The Death of Allah with 100. But then after Jake responded, then I'm like, oh no, there's even more issues with Islam. And I always try to approach things from a philosophical and theological lens, because I think it's good whenever there's a 50-50 in someone's mind. Maybe a Muslim's reading the Quran, they're like, well, I really think these verses are kind of ambiguous, which they're not, by the way. The Torah and the Injil are preserved. But imagine if a Muslim is saying, all right, I'm 50-50 on how I should interpret this. Then usually they go to theology. And they're like, well, obviously, Allah would not will the preservation of those previous books. To which I would say, actually, no, he definitely would, because Allah's will is immutable, unchanging towards his same single attribute. So I always try to buff it up. I was actually kind of inspired after your version of the Islamic dilemma. I know you say you got it from other people, but, besides the point. And I realized, all right, Than, big nerd at Inspiring Philosophy, then did like the Bayesian form of the Islamic dilemma. And I'm like, oh, this is a really good angle to strengthen it even further. And then for anyone who's just hanging on because of theology, I thought we can finally add this to complete the trifecta and really strengthen the Islamic dilemma at every single angle. Obviously, the book's about more than that. It also shows that Unitarian gods make no sense with creation. So it kind of just deals with Jehovah's Witnesses too. But it's hard to say the death of Allah, the God of Jehovah's Witnesses, and Unitarians. So I kind of just kept it on one.
All right. So how you want to start? You want to check out the video and then go through some dilemmas, some additional dilemmas?
Let's go through the cross-examination. That little clip that he posted is perfect, honestly. That's there's moments where I don't even have to say anything. So I think a lot of Muslims that are watching right now, you probably could realize some of the issues with his Wahhabi answers.
Take these first couple super chats real quick. What is your tamale family recipe? Well, it wouldn't be a secret recipe if we shared it with the world.
That's right. Claro. Yeah, we never share those secretos. We were not selling those, especially not for $2. We love it though.
AT Ministry said added to cart already. Talking about your book.
All right on, brother.
Happy to finally see the real David Sagata here.
I can't believe that that's all it took. They realized they were missing me all along.
Zoot's iron sharpened Momo's rear end sensitivity by 434%. This is very Islamophobic, guys. The Christian channel.
That's right.
And super chat from Jake Butts. No comment, though. Thank you. And all right, let's go ahead and check out some of this cross-examination here. And anytime you want to stop or fast forward or anything else, let me know.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to go into cross-examination. So this will be a total of 50 minutes. Each speaker will have 25 minutes to cross-examine the other. We'll start with David cross-examining Jake. If you guys can take the high chairs. And want to remind you folks, please do try to avoid eating up the speaker's time. So if this can get lively. So I just want to make sure that whether it be cheers or jeers, whatever it is, just want to make sure that we're not speaking over our speakers. So I've got the timer set for 25 minutes, and this is pretty strict in terms of we would like you guys to maintain just questions when you are asking the other, and then just answers when you're responding.
Yeah, good luck when Jake is supposed to be asking questions.
Not a chance.
Ready for you, gentlemen. Go ahead, David.
We had a question here. D. Wood, did Nabil know about the Al-Zut hadith before and after he became a Christian? Not that I know of. That story was just not popular among Muslims in the West. Arabic-speaking Muslims were more familiar with it. I asked Rashid about it. Brother Rashid, so he grew up in Morocco. He said, yeah, he was familiar with that story his entire life. So I don't know that Nabil never heard the story, but I never heard him mention it, and I never mentioned it to him because I didn't know about it back when we were talking. I kind of heard about it later on, usually from people who follow the videos of the Arabic-speaking Christian critics of Islam. And so, yeah, I never even really talked about it until there was a good, solid explanation of the story in English, and that came from Raymond Ibrahim. So, yep, I have no idea, but I have no reason to think that Nabil knew about that story.
Yeah, unlike Muhammad with the men of Al-Zud, who was quite popular, that hadith wasn't too popular out here. And so it took a while for that hadith to really get down to business. Well, it did not take very long for the Al-Zut.
I was trying to show everyone that David S. is different. He's not like the rest of the rabble we have around here, but he ruined it.
Alhamdulillah Masih, that's exactly right. Alhamdulillah Masih.
Here we go.
Yeah, Jay, I don't know exactly what you believe on some issues. I have a couple of questions for clarification that they'll become clear in a second. So I'm assuming that, do you believe that Allah's speech is an attribute?
What do you mean by Allah's speech?
Like is the speech of Allah, is that one of his attributes? I've heard Muslims say that. I don't know if you believe that.
Yeah, I mean, it's ambiguous whether you mean in general his ability to speak or a specific act of speech, but yes.
Do you believe in like
what are you grinning about that?
Well, it's just funny because Allah, according to Wahhabis, is like immutable. And so what he wills is immutable. And Allah, therefore, can't just like start willing that his speech happen, right? He must always will that his speech be presented and revealed eternally, right? Always eternally spoken, as many Wahhabi scholars admit. That Jake, for some reason, disagrees with a lot of these Wahhabi scholars, that Allah is able to be said as being eternally speaking, always speaking, not just the ability to speak. So Jake makes it sound like Allah has the potential to speak, but it hasn't been actualized, right? He's like imperfect. He needs to wait on creation for his ability to speak to actually be perfected. So just weird choice on his end. It's part of a dilemma, but I'll hold off on that.
Mm-hmm. And now I start asking about the heavenly tablet because heard tons of Muslims say that Allah's tablet in heaven is like co-eternal with him and so on. So interesting to hear Jake deny that, but here he goes.
A heavenly tablet?
Let me back up slightly.
Or a specific act of speech, but yes.
Do you believe in like a heavenly tablet?
Again, what do you mean by heavenly tablet?
Like, is there a preserved heavenly tablet that is Allah's book? There are Quran. I hear Muslims say that all the time, but there are also Quran verses that sound like that.
There's a preserved tablet, yes, which contains the Quran. Yeah.
So it contain. So does it? It contains the Quran. Does it also contain other? Does it contain the Injil and the Torah and everything, or is it all?
Yeah.
So it contains all those. So is that in their languages? Is it like in Hebrew and Arabic, or is it in some like heavenly language, but then gets like translated for revelation?
No, whatever the original revelation was revealed in.
So you believe the
That's
heavenly
wild.
tablet contains like Arabic?
Yes.
Is that?
And you have an entire dilemma based on that. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, like the fact that Allah's, revelation of his attribute of speech is actually dependent on human grammar. In our languages, temporal languages that change over time, have their own grammar and structure and syntax and cultural function. So Allah's revelation of speech is actually dependent on humans. And so the understanding of it is actually based in human understanding and not in Allah's revelation.
The eyeball here said, if David was really wood, what kind of tree would he be? Garkid tree, because I don't snitch, unlike Malik.
That's right.
Malik ain't no Garkid,
Mm-hmm.
because Garkid don't snitch. All right,
That's right.
Here we go.
Eternal?
No.
The heavenly tablet's not eternal.
No.
Hang on.
Okay. Torah
Back
and
up.
everything, or is it all?
Yeah.
So it contains all those. So is that in their languages? Is it like in Hebrew and Arabic, or is it in some like heavenly language, but then gets like translated for revelation?
No, whatever the original revelation was revealed in.
So you believe the heavenly tablet contains like Arabic?
Yes.
Is that eternal?
No.
The heavenly tablet's not eternal.
No.
Okay, interesting. Allah's speech. Would
Did
you
you
say
think
Allah's?
it was?
Hmm?
Did you think we believe that?
I've heard Muslims say that.
I've never heard any Muslim say
Okay,
that.
so you believe Allah's speech is eternal, but not the heavenly tablet?
Allah's speech, that's why I asked you to, I'm not supposed to ask you questions, but in terms of clarifying, when we say we believe that Allah's speech is eternal, that's referring to his ability to speak, but we believe that he speaks by his will and power whenever he wills. So any particular act of speech is not eternal. It has a beginning and time, including the Quran.
Interesting.
Wild.
So do you?
It's extremely weird. Like if I'll,
You've
if
heard
I,
Muslims say the Quran's like eternal, right?
I've heard that like a trillion times, and he's saying he's never heard any Muslims say that. So that is very interesting. But also, if Allah's speech is eternal, but any act of speech is temporal, then like,
How does it change?
yeah, I mean, if his speech is eternal, then he's been speaking for eternity. But if you're saying like the revelations only came later, what was he saying for all eternity? And I don't know.
It's weird because and we'll get into what the Wahhabi scholars, I've got it there just so people can see where Jake clearly is disagreeing from his own tradition. So we'll get to that. But it seems like Jake is kind of misunderstanding what even some of the Wahhabi scholars are saying here. Because even when some of them say Allah chooses and wills whenever he wills to do what he wants, that's a Wahhabi idea, right? He just like wills whenever he wills. He doesn't have to do something eternally, but he is eternally speaking, right? Otherwise, him having like these individual acts of speech would mean he's going from non-speaking to speaking, which changes his immutability. His will is no longer immutable. It's changing regarding his speech. And so really what Jake should be saying is Allah's speech, the words and all of it, the Quran is eternal in Allah's speech, but Allah chooses to reveal this eternal speech at certain moments in time. Like that would make more sense, but for some reason Jake doesn't say that, and I'm sure a lot of Muslims
No,
were
and
confused by
he
that
goes
too.
against that. And even the heavenly tablet was created. It has a beginning.
Yeah, interesting.
Good to know. Oh, actually, I just realized I don't have the full. Just realized I don't have the full. Even my crossfire. I just went to where it looked like we were changing places, but I'm obviously wrong because I know we went the full 25 and yet I have 22 minutes here. So,
I mean, honestly, the first like 10 is where you get most of the
okay.
theological dilemma.
Yeah,
so it's fine.
we'll watch this until we and I remember I go back to something at the very end, but I don't remember what I went back to. I remember at the end I was like, oh, I want to ask about this real quick. But yeah, we'll watch until I start going off in a different direction.
Believe, do we have any access to the preserved heavenly tablet apart from what Allah reveals in books that are sent down to us?
No.
So the books that we have are the only reflection of the heavenly tablet
That we have access to.
Okay. Does Allah will the preservation of his speech?
In terms of what? What does speech refer to?
Like
in general, everything?
Yeah. Let me ask that
on
first.
Earth, no.
Okay. So
Okay,
not on Earth,
pause
but
that for a second. Holy moly, dude.
Oh, you like that, eh?
He just said Allah does not will the preservation of his speech, which obviously is the Quran, the Injil, the Torah. He does not will the preservation of his speech on earth. Like, so even when I made my presentation, I tried to be really nice about this, because then later on in this thing, he ends up changing his mind. He contradicts himself like 2 minutes later. I think he realizes that what he said doesn't make sense. But right here, he just said, for all the Muslims in the audience and all the Muslims online watching, all the Christians online watching, he just said Allah does not will the preservation of his speech on earth. But here's the issue. As we know, and I'm sure as some of the Muslims in the audience talk to you about afterwards, Allah wills all things. That happened.
Oh, yeah. I think that's what I got back to at the very end. I started asking, so did he will that his speech be corrupted? I think I went to that and started asking him about that.
Yeah. Which again is like weird, because if you're going to say that Allah wills all things, right? Then by saying Allah does not will the preservation of his speech, you can't just say, oh, it's kind of passive, right? Like Allah doesn't will its preservation in a passive sense, you know, it's not that he's actively willing its corruption. Well, no, Allah wills all things. So if Allah is not willing its preservation, Allah would be willing actively its corruption, given the fact that Allah wills all things that come to pass.
Yeah, and that's what I got back to at the end. Did he actually will the corruption? If it's human beings who are changing it, and he's the one who decides, you know, who goes astray and this and that, did he will the corruption of his own scriptures and so on? Yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah. Kind of incoherent.
The heavenly tablet, he wills the preservation.
Yes, it's preserved, yeah.
So the one we don't have access to, he wills the preservation of that, but the ones we do have access to, he doesn't will their preservation.
Exactly.
I love that exactly. Wait, so the one that is completely useless to us because we have no access to it, he's like, oh, I need to protect that. But the ones he actually gives us access to and are therefore useful to us and can guide us, he doesn't will their preservation.
What's the point? Like, why is Allah so unintelligent that he's like, you know, and I know the Quran and some of the Wahhabi scholars will be like, well, Allah protects the tablets in heaven that has the Quran in it and all that, so that Shaitan and some of the demons and the jinn can't go and try to change it and scribble in it and corrupt it, right? So he preserves the tablet in heaven.
The useless one.
Exactly, the useless one that doesn't actually have any impact on us whatsoever. Except for the fact that everything written in that tablet is actually meant to, according to a lot of Muslim scholars, and we'll get into this after the video, Muslim scholars and some Wahhabi scholars say that the preservation of the heavenly tablets is the explanation of the preservation of the earthly books. So it's the fact of the heavenly tablets' preservation that you can trust that the Quran on earth is preserved. But sadly, here's the thing. Well, not sadly. Sadly for Muslims, not sad for us. If whatever's in the tablets, you know, the Quran, by it being in the tablets, you can now have a sense of peace and assurance that the earthly tablets are preserved. Well, what else, David, did you just get him to admit is also written in the tablets?
Torah and the gospel.
Which means that by that same standard, if they use that as a standard for assurance of preservation, that would mean that the Torah and the Injil, the gospel, and the Zabur, and everything else is also able to be said, assured preservation on earth. If a Muslim tries to say, no, the reason that it's preserved in heaven, it's not arbitrary or stupid or random, it actually assures us of the preservation of the Quran on earth, then the same goes for the Injil, Torah, Zabur, and the rest. So if a Muslim tries to make that switch, that's not going to work for them.
It is pretty wild that, so everyone, if you're following this, Allah has his preserved tablet in heaven, which he made at some point. It hasn't always existed. He made it at some point. So he made this heavenly tablet, and the heavenly tablet that he made contains all of the books that he revealed to human beings. So the Torah, the Zabur, the Gospel, any other books, and the Quran as well, and has them in the original languages in which they were revealed. So you have the heavenly tablet, and then you have the books on earth. Now, Allah could have willed to preserve his heavenly tablet, or he could have willed to preserve the books here on earth, or he could have willed to preserve both of them. Instead, he didn't care about the books on earth, let them be corrupted, and he preserves the heavenly tablet, which we don't have access to.
It's hikmah. It's hikmah. You don't get it. It's hikmah. It's like a high hikmah kind of thing.
That's some high-level hikmah there.
Yeah, this is reaching Ali Dawah levels. It's like we're getting up there. We're reaching the top of the barrel. That's for sure.
Of that, but the ones we do have access to, he doesn't will their preservation.
Exactly.
Well, that's interesting to know. So one is technically useless to us, you would say, but the other one that we have, he has not willed the preservation of his earthly books.
Yeah.
That could be kind of another Islamic dilemma. The heavenly tablet is perfectly preserved, but useless because we have no access to it. The earthly books, he did not will their preservation, and so they're corrupted, but we can't really tell what's corrupted and what's not, and so they are, as far as knowing what we're supposed to do, kind of useless. And so useless and useless, that's what Allah has left us with. Great. Awesome. Thank you.
It makes sense. I mean,
Powerful
goodness,
stuff.
like what one generation after Muhammad, people said that you cannot say you've memorized the whole of the Quran because much of it has been lost. So, yeah, we have like historical reasons to maybe affirm that dilemma, which, believe it or not, I did turn that to a dilemma in the presentation.
Well, that's because we don't believe in the concept that any time that somebody is going to sit down at this table and start writing something with their own hand and claim it's from God, that they're going to be struck with lightning and killed. I mean, this is...
That's exactly what I heard Muslims say about the Quran for years, that not particularly that, but every time someone sits down to write out the Quran, Allah miraculously intervenes and makes sure he gets every single letter correct.
Doesn't that mean that he's like willing the preservation on earth?
That's what it would sound like. All right, I rewound it again just so we can...
He has
Gives us
not
some context.
willed the preservation of his earthly books.
Yeah, well, that's because we don't believe in the concept that any time that somebody is going to sit down at this table and start writing something with their own hand and claim it's from God, that they're going to be struck with lightning and killed. I mean, this is a ridiculous way to try to understand how God is preserving his word. We don't believe in that.
So Allah's preserving the Quran would not be sort of part of Allah's nature.
What do you mean by his
Like,
nature?
as far as you said, preserving the earthly scriptures is not part of Allah's will. So it's not something that like necessarily follows from
It's
him.
not something that he has to do. It's his choice.
Interesting. So he can choose to protect his earthly revelations or not choose to preserve his earthly revelations.
Exactly. I don't see any reason why it would be required that God would have to preserve all of his earthly revelations. I don't even think you believe in that as a Christian.
So the earthly revelations that we have are sort of inherently unstable reflections of the heavenly tablet, but they haven't. There's nothing within Allah's will that necessitates that they be preserved accurately.
There's nothing within Allah's nature that requires that he preserve any scripture. He willed to preserve the Quran. He did not will to preserve the entirety of the original.
What's up? Are you raising your hand?
2 minutes ago, no, I was just shocked that he actually said that. Like 2 minutes ago, you got him to say, I remember him saying, that Allah does not will the preservation of his speech on earth. And now 2 minutes later, he's saying Allah willed the preservation of the Quran, but then ceased to will the preservation of the Torah and the Injil, apparently pretty soon after he sent them in. And also not just that, but also the 144,000 prophets. I guess every single time he gave them a message, then he just kept on willing that it was with them until they died. Then I guess now there's no leftover message or remnant that anybody on earth can find, even an iota or a little dot or scratch or anything. So apparently Allah has failed 144,000. I'm not a math professional, but 144,000, and then the Zabur, the scrolls of Abraham, the Torah, and the Injil. So 144,004 times Allah has failed to will the preservation of his speech, or he has succeeded in willing their corruption. Why on earth would I think that when he sends the Quran, all of a sudden he's going to just start saying, you know what? All those other things, they're not related to my character, my nature, my general disposition, or my evaluations. This book, though, this Quran, this is different. I'm really going to try to preserve this one. Like, what assurance do Muslims have legitimately? I don't see the assurance that any Muslim could have about anything with the Quran or anything in their faith whatsoever. It's ridiculous.
It is pretty weird.
144,004 times that you fail.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, as you pointed out, it would have to be like the gospel would have had to been corrupted pretty quickly because we have no record of any gospel that agrees with Islam. And so you've got Allah saying that he gave the gospel as a guidance for mankind. That would sound like his will. I'm giving this because I want this to happen with it. But then he wills that it be corrupted. Isn't that weird? It's like, hey, I will to give David S. a cup of water. Ha ha! I smacked it out of my own hand. Now he'll never get what I said I wanted him to have. Wait, what? What?
Yeah, and again, the worst part is, remember, his will is immutable, which also goes with him, so it's like an eternal attribute. So Allah is eternally willing to prevent himself from doing the thing that he says he wants to do. Especially if you get into like the two different wills of Allah. One is just the universal will. So everything that happens is Allah's will, including stuff, as Muslim scholars say, stuff he doesn't want to happen. Like all the stuff or stuff he doesn't like or doesn't love, but he is eternally willing that those things he doesn't like or love happen. So apparently he's just like, oh, I can't stop myself from stopping myself. I need to fail. I have to lose.
Allah has this weird internal struggle going on. Like, I want to do this, but he's like self-sabotaging. I really want to do this. Shut up. You won't do that. Yes, I will. I will do that. No, too bad. Shut up. I'll never let us do that. Maybe that's the explanation for the plural pronouns. He's got all these different wills that are fighting, and in this part of his will is like, I want this scripture to be a guidance for mankind. Like, under no circumstances will I allow this to be a guidance for mankind. And then they fight.
That's why he has the two right hands. The two right hands are like arm wrestling each other to see which one works out.
For all eternity.
Alhamdulillah. This makes a lot more sense. I think that's clear. The worst part is you're actually about to get him to admit that there's this division of Allah's will. I'm pretty sure it's like right after this. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting how this plays out.
There goes Tawhed.
Automatically.
Accurately.
There's nothing within Allah's nature that requires that he preserve any scripture. He willed to preserve the Quran. He did not will to preserve the entirety of the original Torah or Injil or other revelations.
So with respect to his revealed scriptures sent down, you would say his will is divided. He has willed to preserve the Quran, but not the other scriptures.
Correct.
Why is he so matter of fact about that?
So Allah's will is divided with regards to his revealed speech. He wants part of his revealed speech preserved and part of his revealed speech not preserved.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
good to know.
Like,
Good to know.
why is
Exactly.
he so okay with
Duh.
saying that?
Duh. Everyone knows that, David. Interesting.
Yeah, and then millions of Muslims rising up.
Yeah, I have to say, I was not expecting some of these answers.
Yeah, and this one's like really damaging, right? Because again, this isn't just, I know some Muslims or even Christians might be like, well, maybe it's like a weird Wahhabi thing. Nah, it's not. Okay, Wahhabi scholars are pretty clear that Allah is one, Tawhed in every sense. All of Allah's attributes are one. His will is considered an attribute. Therefore, his will is one and not composed, no parts, no divisions, right? So this would be like a pretty strong blow to standard understandings of Tawhed, and claiming that Allah is not composed of parts or portions, because then it's not just that he has like a divided will, he has an opposed or eternally contradictory will. Since again, his will is eternal and unchanging, this means that Allah has an eternally contradictory set of wills, and he's timeless, right? So there's no, you can't say, oh, well, he's willing it at this time. I'm like, no, his will is timeless. So you can't say that he's willing this at this time compared to this time, right? At least in the standard understanding of a timeless, non-sequential will.
We might want to bring up some of this in responses to their objections about the Trinity. It's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like part of Allah is saying, I want to preserve my speech so it can be a guidance to mankind. Another part of him saying, do not preserve that, dude. Do not preserve that. We're going to have to fight over this.
Wait, that's what they said about like Muhammad Ajab straight up said that. He said, if Jesus and God the Father got into a fight, who would win? Right? And so and a lot of Muslims are like, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, and they think it's like a really clever argument or something. Because they don't understand that our God is like one in will. But then ironically enough, we can easily just say, who's going to win a fight, Allah or Allah? Because
Allah's he said Allah's will is divided. So it's Allah's will versus Allah's will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Eternally. Right.
Forever.
Too bad.
Allah's will just kicking the crap out of itself.
Yeah. My money's on Allah's will.
Allah's will is going to win that one.
Yeah, probably.
So why would you believe that he would will the preservation of the Quran and not the other scriptures that the Quran says it's confirming?
Because the Quran is the final revelation for mankind, and it's applicable to all of mankind, whereas the previous revelations were not. They were for specific groups of people, for specific
guidance for mankind.
Like the Quran says, a guidance for mankind. The gospel, the Injil, is a guidance for mankind. Which means, well, you know what, actually, this is fine. We can play this back. If you go back 10 seconds, we can just fill this in and say, if Jake is saying the standard for knowing Allah will preserve something is that it's a guidance for mankind, then we can actually use this as a new dilemma and say, oh, okay, let's see what the Quran says. So actually, yes, never mind. This is good. We can use this.
And not the other scriptures that the Quran says it's confirming.
Because the Quran is the final revelation for mankind, and it's applicable to all of mankind, whereas the previous revelations were not. They were for specific groups of people, for specific times, and that was part of God's plan. He always had it in that manner. Now, when the final revelation comes along, and it's for all of mankind and all time going forward, he chooses to preserve that according to his plan.
And yet in the, let me see what you think about this. In the final revelation, he gives as one of the reasons Jews and Christians should believe in that revelation, that it's confirming ours. Wouldn't it have been good to preserve our scriptures so that they would actually line up, instead of allowing ours to be corrupted so that they don't line up and then the argument doesn't work at all?
Well, I don't really understand how this relates to the Islamic dilemma.
Everything he brings up about the Islamic dilemma has nothing to do with the Islamic dilemma.
Authority.
But he doesn't understand why the Quran confirming the previous scriptures, but Muslims claiming that the previous scriptures have been corrupted, presents a problem. By the way, Jake, the name of that problem is the Islamic dilemma.
There's contradictions, David. There's no way that there can be an Islamic dilemma because there's contradictions in the Quran. Therefore, there's nothing wrong. What a wild response he gave. And again, like, we can just fill this in. Now we can actually get him on record saying we can know it's preserved because it's a guidance for all of mankind. Well, the Quran says that that's what the Torah and the Injil are. Therefore, again, by that same standard, Allah would preserve them. So that helps us again on the theological end. But then he also says that, there's nothing in Allah's nature that would ever cause him to have like a specific reason to necessitate the preservation of the Quran. So then why does he will the preservation of the Quran? Is it like arbitrary? Is it just like, oh, this thing's last, therefore it should be preserved, but then that means also all the past things shouldn't be? Like, Allah could have just willed the preservation of the past things and the final revelation. There's no reason he has to will the last revelation and not will the preservation of the previous ones. There's no reason, right?
Yeah,
Same
it would be like
heavenly tablets.
Yeah, it would be like on the issue of abrogation. There are Quran verses that abrogate or cancel other Quran verses. That doesn't mean that he has to make those abrogated verses corrupted. He doesn't say, oh, now they don't apply, so therefore I need to corrupt them. I need to make them corrupt. Doesn't make any sense. But so it's one thing to say, hey, Allah doesn't really care about previous revelations because he's got his final revelation. Okay, but his final revelation tells Jews and Christians that the reason you can know it's the final revelation is because it lines up with your revelations. Oops. Mm-hmm. I said that from the moment I wrote the heavenly tablet. Can't say from eternity with Jake. But Allah knew that his final revelation was going to point to, as confirmation of its authority, inspiration and authority, was going to point to the previous revelations. But then he had those previous revelations corrupted. And so it's like, I've got this revelation. I'm going to give it to people. And here's my main argument for why they should believe in it. It confirms these scriptures, which, I wanted them corrupted. So he
also deceives Muhammad, though, right? Because doesn't he say to go to the people of the book if he has questions? Mm-hmm. So that means that he's actually telling Muhammad to go to people whose books he already willed the corruption of, his own speech, because apparently he doesn't care that much about his speech sent down. His attributes manifested in reality have like no bearing whatsoever. So he's like, Muhammad, go to those people whom I sent down speech to, and they're going to help you understand the Quran. How will they do that? By giving you lessons from speech that's been corrupted by me. It's all useless. Just all useless.
So Jews and Christians can only know that the Quran is the word of Allah because it's confirming our scriptures, but sadly we can't test that because our scriptures have been corrupted. And if Muhammad wants to know if his revelations are from God, he can do that by making sure they line up with our revelations. But so sad, Allah had them corrupted, and therefore no one can test this revelation anymore because all the ways that Allah listed in the Quran itself for knowing that this is the word of Allah, he had all the evidence corrupted.
Unfalsifiable. Now you just have to take it on Muhammad's word. You just got to be like, well, Muhammad said so it must be true. It's actually like pure circular reasoning, which I know all of the Muslim responses to the Islamic dilemma are, but I think now with the theological leg of this, you can see that even at the like level of Allah, this is just pure circular reasoning. Why can you trust the Quran? Because Allah said so. What about the arguments that Allah gives? None of them work. Why? Because Allah willed for none of his arguments to work. Well, why would Allah will for all of his arguments in the Quran to not work and also to be factually incorrect? Why would he will incorrect information that's with bad arguments, low intelligence arguments, to be in the Quran, his speech, because Allah has eternally willed that he has low intellectual arguments and fallacious reasoning in his revealed speech in the Quran. Why? I don't know.
Allah willed fallacious reasoning.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Powerful stuff.
That's the proof.
Specifically, I mean, it's not really directly on the point.
Observe our scriptures so that they would actually line up instead of allowing ours to be corrupted so that they don't line up and then the argument doesn't work at all.
Well, I don't really understand how this relates to the Islamic dilemma specifically. I mean, it's not really directly on the point, but I'll answer it anyway. We believe that God chose not to preserve those scriptures. Now, we believe that he preserved enough of them in order...
Guys, always pay attention to we believe, we believe, we believe. This is becoming way more common. It's not the Quran says, the Quran says, the Quran says. It's we believe, we believe, we believe. And what's the entire point? I mean, the point of the Islamic dilemma is what you believe does not line up with the Quran at all. It doesn't. And so when we bring up, hey, here's what the Quran actually says, or here's this problem or that problem, they go, but we believe, but we believe, but we believe. And what's he saying here? He's saying things that aren't in the Quran at all.
At all.
And,
like, where did Allah say that you cannot trust the Torah and the, like, it's so stupid.
Those scriptures. Now, we believe that he preserved enough of them in order for the Jews and Christians or previous peoples who followed previous books and laws that he sent down, he preserved enough to be able to point towards the truth of the Quran.
So
now hold on a minute.
The previous scripture.
Well, if Allah is if Allah is able to, because now this is even worse, because maybe you could say, oh, well, like, Allah gave these people the freedom of the will to corrupt the text that he had sent down, all 144,004 instances that he did this. He gave them the freedom of the will to corrupt it, and so that's why he did it. No, actually, you can't go with that argument, because he just said, no, Allah willed the corruption of it, but not the complete corruption. He willed enough of it to be preserved to point to the Quran. But if that means that he could have willed it to be preserved, obviously Allah is not limited, right? So if he could have willed a little bit of it to be preserved, he could have willed the whole thing to be preserved, then why didn't he?
Yeah.
And why make this whole cherry, like, again, another fallacy. He is forcing people to do a cherry picking fallacy, or use cherry picking fallacies in their argumentation from the Bible to the Quran. And so now all you Jews and Christians, you have to go into your scriptures, and wherever it confirms the Quran, then that means that Muhammad's a true prophet. Now, if your book also matches up with other random books on earth, ignore that. That doesn't count. But if it randomly matches up with our book on some spurious or poor interpretation, then you can trust it.
Yeah, this is wild stuff. So as David was pointing out there, it seems Jake's position is Allah willed that parts of them be preserved so that you can find those parts that agree with Islam, and you're supposed to conclude based on parts agreeing with the Quran. You're supposed to conclude that the Quran is the word of Allah. So he didn't just leave it into people's hands, just let them completely corrupt it. No, he said, I want to make sure that enough of this is preserved that people can engage in some circular reasoning and conclude that the Quran is the word of Allah. And it's like, wait a minute. So his will is like why? Why would you will part of it be preserved and not just all of it be preserved? And then supposedly it would line up perfectly with the Quran. There's no connection. There's no connection here as far as reasoning, as far as like, oh, here's why Allah would want to do this. It's just they're reasoning backwards. It's here's what we were told when we reverted to Islam by our sheikhs and imams. And now let's go ahead and twist the Quran until it lines up with that. And it's like their entire goal is always force Allah's speech to line up with what we were told, even though what we're told isn't in the Quran at all. It doesn't come from Allah or from Muhammad. What was that myth? What was the innkeeper's name? The Greek myth, man. The Greek myth. Let's see.
Oh, goodness.
Greek. I just forgot the name. Innkeeper myth. Who is that?
I'm not Greek enough. I don't know.
What the heck is his name? Oh, Procrustes. Okay. Procrustes. Yeah. They always remind me of Procrustes. So Procrustes was this insane, demented innkeeper, and he had a bed, and the bed was exactly a certain length. And you'd come to the inn, and if you got into the bed and you weren't the exact length, he would stretch you out. He would stretch you out so that you fit the bed. And if you were longer than the bed, he would start chopping off body parts until you lined up with the bed. But that's how Muslims are with the speech of Allah and Muhammad. It's like, it doesn't line up. So let's just start chopping this off, and we're going to stretch this. We're going to chop this off. We're going to stretch this. We're going to chop this off. And eventually it'll line up with what we already want to believe.
Which is wild, because in Jake doing this, I just realized actually, Jake actually just introduced another division in Allah's will. Because before, when you brought it up to Jake, you're like, hey, doesn't this mean that there's divisions in Allah's will between his revelations? And he said, yes. Well, now you just got him to admit that now there's divisions in Allah's will for just one revelation.
Oh, yeah. He can will part of the book to be preserved and part of it to be corrupted, and then wants us to go to find the parts that were preserved and to be shocked that they agree with the Quran. And so then we're supposed to believe in the Quran.
And ignore the parts that are corrupted.
Yeah. And so, yeah, his will is divided with respect to particular books. This is,
Wow.
Allah is pretty, Tawheed's just screwed up, man.
Well, because now it's 3 major divisions, right? There's 3 splits in Allah's will. There's the split between the old revelations and the Quran, right? They're corrupted and this is preserved. But now there's 2 more divisions in the Torah. Part of it's preserved and part of it is corrupted. And then in the Injil, part of it's preserved and part is corrupted. So now there's these 3 big divisions happening, and we're not supposed to say 3 when it comes to Allah, but apparently now we have to. What are we supposed to do with that? Like, why is Allah so bad at this? Why does he argue like some sort of 7th century caravan? I don't know. It's just weird and strange.
Allah's will got zooted, man. Jake zooted Allah's will.
All these
The Torah and the
divisions.
gospel and whatever else Allah has revealed.
Were previous peoples who followed previous books and laws that he sent down, he preserved enough to be able to point towards the truth of the Quran.
So the previous scriptures, the Torah and the gospel and whatever else Allah has revealed, they kind of they have like an expiration date, like milk, right?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, you
Well,
said
it
they're
makes
just
sense
revealed for a
because-
certain place, for a certain group at a certain time, and that they're,
Yeah, that's what he.
Yeah,
That's
it's got an expiration date.
Yeah, it's toxic. That's right.
Milk's
I like the
gone
milk
bad.
one because
The Torah's gone bad.
that's right. Injil too, bro.
The gospel's gone bad.
They call it the bad news now.
Yeah, it's got an expiration date right on it. And you guys are still trying to use the gospel.
Yeah, one day after Jesus went to heaven. One day after. Too bad.
what his plan was, that for specific groups of people, he revealed certain laws. You even agreed with that when you were citing Quran 548. I don't agree with your interpretation of that.
It's what he
But,
says.
Yes,
Oh, my goodness.
he revealed certain revelations and laws for certain groups of people that was context dependent.
Now, since
Okay,
these,
wait a
again,
second.
since these revelations,
So, and this is a separate, this also in the death of Allah, this is a separate dilemma about like Allah having context dependent language. It's kind of funny how many of the exact things I wrote about in the last 10 dilemmas ends up being what Jake talks about here. He talks about like context dependent language and saying Allah's choice of revelation is dependent on the context. Well, here's the issue. That means that Allah is dependent on something, right, for his choices, but Muslims often say that Allah's will is this independent, immutable aspect of him that's always been there. So his will about revealing speech at a certain point in a certain way or whatever else shouldn't be dependent on context. But now he just admitted that Allah's choice is dependent on context. Why is the context different between Jews and Christians versus later Muslims? He doesn't say, he just says, well, there's a different context. He just says it. He doesn't explain it.
That's all you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Context dependent.
now, since these revelations expire, then when Allah is saying in the Quran to Jews and Christians, hey, how are you rejecting this guy's revelations when they confirm your revelations? And you said that you don't think that requires the preservation of the previous scriptures, but would you agree that, well, let me put it this way. If Muhammad came along and said, hey, look, I'm just this guy from Arabia, and I'm receiving revelations, and they actually line up. They actually line up with your revelations on all these fundamental doctrines and stories. Isn't that amazing? Then they could look at those and say, wow, that is amazing. This guy came out of nowhere and his revelations line up with ours. But since Allah allowed those revelations to be corrupted, and it requires picking and choosing, well, this part is real, this part is not, wouldn't that make Allah's argument circular? Like, we have to assume that it's from Allah and then go to our scriptures, take out all the parts that don't line up, and then we say, wow, it's amazing that what's left over, once we take out all the parts that the Quran doesn't line up with, it's amazing that it all lines up after we take out all the parts that don't line up.
What's the question?
Oh, so the question is, so one, by not preserving the previous scriptures so that they don't line up, and thus requiring that we assume that the Quran is the correct word of Allah, then we go to our scriptures and we ignore the conflicts because we just toss those out because he didn't protect those. Then we're having to start by assuming that the Quran is the word of Allah in order to go and take out the parts that disagree with it. And this is supposed to convince us that the Quran is the word of Allah because it lines up with what's left after we take out all the other parts. How would that not be circular?
No, well, you're not merely attempting to be convinced by the previous scriptures matching up with certain parts of the Quran. That's not.
It's exactly what Allah says over and over again. I'm confirmed. Why are you rejecting? Why are you rejecting Muhammad when he confirms your revelations? Why are you rejecting the Quran when it confirms your revelations? Why are you rejecting when it confirms? Confirms. And then we go, does it confirm? And Jake says, no, it doesn't. It's only the parts that agree with it. Which is true between any two books. You pick any two books, are going to be parts that agree with the other book and so on. So, so here I was getting to, why did he choose a circular argument over a non-circular argument? So Allah, they should make an argument out of it. Because he's one, he prefers a circle.
It had to be a circle.
Yes, if he were triune, he would prefer triangles, but he loves circles.
Actually, wait, that fits though.
He loves circles, so he loves circular reasoning.
He would want premise, conclusion if he's triune. And so he would actually want a logical syllogism. Allah's like, it's true because I say so this time. Until he says it's not true anymore a couple centuries later, apparently.
Merely the argument. We believe that the Prophet, I know that you don't believe.
Did you catch it again? We believe. And then he says, I know you don't believe. Why? Well, Allah gives his reasons for me to believe, and you say they're all wrong.
Yeah. It's wild that, a lot of these Muslims, when they argue with atheists, they make fun of the atheists for relativism, right? Like, oh, you're just going based off your like personal convictions, and you're, even if you go with the more advanced atheists that go into like some sort of metaphysical or metaphysical principle, and it's like, it doesn't matter because you're still denying these fundamental explanations for morality. But then when Muslims are arguing about things like child marriage, or things like the Islamic dilemma, or things like slavery, a lot of cases, unless you're Daniel Hakikachu, but a lot of cases they'll say, well, this was just normal behavior back then, or this is something that they believed at the time, or this is something we just believe today, right? There's no like objective standard that they're willing to go to on harm principle for child marriage, or like human moral value for slavery, or in the Islamic dilemma case, they're not willing to go to the Quran to see what the Quran says, right? They're like, well, we know that the Quran can't mean what it's saying. Allah can't mean what he's clearly saying in his clear book, because if Allah was saying that, then it would be.
Did you say queer book?
No, but you could. Well, maybe if you look at the Night of Al-Zut, but I would say that it's really clear that Muslims like Daniel Hakikachu, but also Jake here, recognize that it's a contradiction, but they don't get that that's part of the dilemma. Over and over, they're like, no, because if what you're saying is true, then the Quran would have contradictions. It's like, yes, like that's the whole point. That's the entire point of the dilemma.
Yeah, that's we probably need to draw attention to this, but they're along the lines of like, we can be circular, and since we can be circular, you can't make us not believe in this, right? Like, we're assuming that the Quran is the perfect speech of Allah, and therefore, if you show that it's confirming scriptures that contradict it, you must be getting something wrong, and those verses that you're quoting must not mean what they say. And so, we can reject your argument. Well, that's true. We can't make you accept an argument, but keep in mind, the issues we're talking about with the previous scriptures, that's meant to convince us.
Yes.
Allah is supposedly saying something that to convince us. You Jews, here's why you should believe in this. You Christians, here's why you should believe in this. And the reasons he gives, Muslims say, no, your scripture is being corrupted, and it makes the argument circular. We have to assume that the Quran is the word of Allah like they do, and if we do that, then we'll conclude that the Quran is the word of Allah. Oh, great. That's true with anything. If I start by assuming that the Book of Mormon is the word of God, well, guess what? I can conclude, based on my initial assumption, that the Book of Mormon is the word of God. It's just weird. They would never accept this stupid argument with any other book on the planet, but because it's their book, they just accept anything. They lower the standard down to where there is no standard of what makes a good argument. Make a good argument. You're looking for true premises and valid logic. They go with fallacious logic and false premises and say, you see, this is the proof. And it's like, I don't think the truth would need endlessly fallacious arguments and false premises to show that it's somehow true.
Of course. Now, of course, like, to be fair with Islamic theology, I make a dilemma about this in The Death of Allah. Allah doesn't actually have any reason to think that truthful, honest, open communication is a good thing, right? I think that might be like Dilemma 100 and a different version of it. It's like Dilemma 60 or whatever. But, for us Christians, we actually believe that our God would, before creation was ever a thing, our God would have a high evaluation, like a high axiological evaluation of something like communication, truthful communication. Why is that? Because there's three persons who perfectly know each other in perfect, truthful, eternal communication. So, of course, God, the triune God of Scripture, would actually value truthful communication when he makes his creation. Allah doesn't have any other persons, and so Allah doesn't have any reason to value truthful communication, logical presentation, honesty, even self-revelation makes no sense, by the way. The Quran makes no sense because Allah doesn't see self-revelation expressing himself to another person. He doesn't see that as a good thing eternally. So the fact that Allah even has a Quran makes no sense. It goes against his nature, right? Like the God of Christianity, that makes sense because he actually sees self-expression showing himself to another person. He eternally sees that as a good that's fully actualized in him. So of course he would send down scriptures, and divine revelation makes sense. But in Islam, forget all these dilemmas. The Quran's existence makes no sense given the Unitarian theism of Islam. Like, at all. Not at all. Stupid.
And David S. here likes to do that a lot.
Yeah. It's
so
true.
That Islamic theology just breaks down because it's all wrong.
Yeah, of course it is.
Let's see if there's anything else here.
Our paradigm, we believe that the prophet performed miracles. We believe that he had true prophecies.
We believe,
and many other things that confirmed the veracity of his prophet.
We believe that he performed miracles, even though the Quran says he didn't perform miracles, but we believe it anyway because we've been told that, and we believe, and we just don't care what the Quran says at all.
So it's not you have to just go to this one specific part of the previous scriptures, and if that doesn't convince you that you're damned to hell or something like that. That's
literally what the
because this is you're talking about what you believe, but the Quran is presenting a case to Jews and Christians.
Yeah.
You Jews and Christians are wrong for rejecting this book. And we say, okay, why should we believe in this book? And the response is, it confirms your book. And we look and we say, well, there's a bunch of things it disagrees on, like really important stuff. And you're saying, oh, but you're supposed to, those have all been corrupted. Wouldn't that require us to assume from the beginning that your book is the word of Allah, and that therefore we take out the parts that don't line up?
No, because as I was just presenting, there are independent reasons from the parts that line
Independent reasons. So Allah gives as his main argument, it's confirming your book, and Jake has thrown that out. And so there's supposed to be these independent reasons like Muhammad's miracles and so on, which the Quran denies. And
Also, how is that independent? Like, how would that even be considered an independent reason? Wouldn't that be dependent on some sort of like set of hadith sources or something?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just so weird. It's Allah saying, here's my reason. And the reason turns out to be completely bogus and circular and filled with like false claims and so on, according to these guys. And then, but what it really means when it says you should believe in Muhammad because he's confirming your book is you should believe in Muhammad for all these other reasons, like miracles, but he didn't perform any. This is just, I don't even know why they think, like, I assume there's some reason inside their heads for why Islam is true. I just can't get them to say what it is.
Oh, I guarantee you I know what it is. I've been watching a ton of live streams for the last like year and a half, and I kid you not, every time that you or IP or Than or anybody, or actually even I just like Truth Defenders experienced this a couple days ago in God Logic 2, you guys will go through an entire presentation of various dilemmas, Islamic dilemmas, all these things. And then after they'll bring up like Muhammad and scientific miracles. That stuff's nonsense. It's already gone. You bring up Islamic dilemma and they try to find a way to get out of that. When they can't answer it, I think I've seen this on over 20 or 30 live streams. Every single time Muslims will say, well, the Trinity just doesn't make sense. I kid you not. Over and over and over. I think Than even brought this up. He said, Truth Defenders brought this up like a day or two ago. He says they just always retreat back to Tawhed, which is actually why, I kid you not, I wrote this book whenever I did like a year ago or whatever, and then I made the updated version because I started to notice that Muslims always just retreat right back to Tawhed because they legitimately do think, I know they do all this posturing where they think the Islamic dilemma doesn't work. No, I think in a lot of cases they kind of recognize it does. But they're like, yeah, but at the heart of it, it's really just the Trinity doesn't make sense. Tawhed makes more sense. And I was like, no, if that's the last leg that all these Muslim callers and Muslim da'is and imams and dawah teachers stand on is the notion that Tawhed is somehow better than the Trinity, then I was like, forget that. I'm going to make a book that explains that that's just nonsense because it is. And that's the only reason obviously it's probably like money, and if it's like, Muhammad Hijab, it's probably just
smashing
money.
hoes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Going to the club and meeting trans men. But besides that, when you get past all the zoot of it all, you start to realize that a lot of the random Muslims you meet who don't have access to large amounts of wealth and ladies at clubs like the imams do and dawah teachers do, really just, it comes down every single time to Tawhed. So dumb.
And it's interesting why they think that Islam matches up favorably with Christianity on this issue of Trinity versus Tawhed is because they've been lied to about what Tawhed is.
Yes.
And they don't know all the problems associated with it. And they've never heard anything. Oh, it just means oneness. Well, one, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But two, my goodness, if you want to talk about confusing, actually try to understand Tawhed. Try to get your mind around that based on what the Muslim sources say. It's like it's beyond ridiculous.
Yeah,
crazy
right?
stuff.
You got like
crazy
a pale
stuff.
man that the Quran is. It's its own person or persons.
Yeah. It's you've got Allah. You've got Allah, and Allah. The reason they say Allah's speech is eternal because Allah's speech originates from within Him. Right? He's speaking it out. This is part of Him. So this is an attribute of Him. It's when Allah creates something, He says be, and then it pops into existence. His speech, even His speech of saying be, originates from within Him. So it's in a different category. And they don't believe that Allah can change in that way and just suddenly develop an attribute or something like this. So His speech is eternal. Notice the exact same reasoning would apply to Allah's spirit, because Allah's spirit is not something that He says be and it pops into existence. Allah's spirit is something He breathes out. So if He breathes out, this originates from within Him, and this also must be something that is eternal. So you've got Allah's speech and Allah's spirit, which are both eternal. Otherwise, He had a major change, right? So you've noticed what you got already, ladies and gentlemen. Allah, His spirit, and His word or all co-eternal, right? All right. So we've got
Wow.
that. Now, Allah's spirit, according to the Quran, appears as a man. It
Yes.
appears in the form of a man. He shows up and talks to Mary, so on. So Allah's speech is not only, Allah's spirit is not only his eternal spirit, it's also a personal agent. It thinks and speaks and has thoughts and communicates all this. It is a personal agent. Allah's speech also appears at the judgment in the form of a man. This is separate from Jesus being the word of Allah and Jesus appearing as a man. We'll leave that aside for now. But Allah's word, Allah's speech, will appear at the judgment as a pale man. So Allah's speech is can appear as a pale man, communicate, intercede for people, and so on. What's that mean? It is a personal agent. Allah's speech is a personal agent. Okay? It gets more confusing because it's the entire Quran that shows up as a pale man to intercede for people. But within the one Quran that appears as a pale man, there are 114 flocks of birds, one for each chapter of the Quran, that also appears. But each one of these flocks of birds is independent and starts interceding for people. Surah 2 appears as a flock of birds and remembers things. It's been following you your entire life, and it knows how often you've recited and what you've done with Surah 2 and so on, and it intercedes for you. Same with Surah 3 and so on. So within the one speech of Allah, there are 114 other personal agents within there, and there's still just one Quran and so on. And it's like, just think of this. You've got Allah and his spirit is being breathed out from all eternity. It appears as a man. Allah's speech is being spoken out from all eternity. It appears as a man, but within the man that is his speech is 114 flocks of birds, and they're all personal agents, and yet they combine like Voltron, like Devastator, to just be one big pale Quran. What was your objection to the Trinity, Muslims? And notice we haven't even touched Allah's will being divided, and I want part of my speech and not this part, and this. What's your objection, guys? What's your objection to the Trinity? What's crazy is you can go up to any Muslim and start asking about that. They've never heard anything I just said at all. Not one word of it. Why? Why? Because their leaders don't tell them this stuff. Their leaders don't tell them this stuff. They just tell them, oh yeah, Tawheed's just perfect oneness. Oh, unlike that confusing Trinity. The Christians are confused. But we will keep you in such a state of complete ignorance that you'll think Tawheed is a simple doctrine.
Yeah.
Biggest bunch of liars the world has ever seen.
So simple that Jake, within 2 minutes, goes from saying Allah does not will the preservation of speech on earth to 2 minutes later saying Allah does will the preservation of his speech as the Quran, but then at one time willed the preservation of the Torah and the Injil and the Zabura, but then later decided to choose to, although of course it was an eternal act, eternally willed the corruption of his speech as such, as speech. And yeah, very, very clear theology, very clear model of God, very, very clear.
All right, let's see if there's anything here worth
listening to. Don't line up, and what you just mentioned, there are independent reasons that the Quran gives, not only for Jews and Christians, but for anyone who reads it, for why it's true and why the prophet was a true prophet.
I'm talking about this particular argument. Hey, you should believe in him and his revelation because he's confirming your revelation. I'm looking at that, I'm going, this doesn't line up with my revelation. And your response is, we'll take out the parts that don't line up with the Quran, and then it'll match up perfectly. Wouldn't that be true of any two books in the world? If I had one book and I had another book, wouldn't it be true that if I took out all the parts in the first book that don't line up with the second book, then they would agree? And am I supposed to say, wow, this must be from God?
Yeah, if you believe, for example, that
he did.
The
He just said,
Prophet Muhammad was prophesied in the scriptures that you have now.
The corrupt scriptures?
Yeah, exactly. If you believed that he was prophesied in there.
If I believe that he's prophesied in corrupt scriptures, okay. Is there anything?
Then you'll come to believe that he's prophesied.
Do we need to continue with this, or should we go on to Islamic dilemmas? Okay. All right, guys. So you can watch more of that, and I eventually later on in this, you can watch this over on Modern Day Debate. But I eventually get back to some of this and ask him basically if Allah isn't just passive and not willing the preservation of his scriptures, but if he actually willed the corruption of the previous scriptures. So you can check that out. But we want to get to some of these extra dilemmas that we see. All right, you want me to put this up on the screen?
Yes.
All right, what do we got here?
Yeah,
hang
we're gonna-
on.
Yes.
Hang on. 1 second.
Oh, you can get us up there too.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me. I always have trouble with this because I never learned programs, and then I just try to figure it out while I'm live, and I don't know what all these buttons ever do. Let me see here. What if I do this? Wait, no. What's that? What did I
That's just
do?
you.
Okay, that's not that. Hang on. What if I do this? All right. Let me see if I do this. Aha.
Hey.
And that. Aha. All right.
Nice.
Now where do you want us?
We can just go on the corner of the left side or something. Yeah, top left corner should be good.
Up here?
Yes.
All right. And I can always move us around if we need to. I'll make us a little smaller. Let's go.
Yeah. And the cool thing is we've actually talked through some of these, so we'll be able to breeze through some of it. But I wanted to show the Wahhabi sources so that people can know, hey, Jake might not be as consistent with the whole Wahhabi thing as he makes it out to be. Because Jake made some wild statements that not only would Wahhabis...
Look what you just did.
Look at that. Look at
All
that.
right. I'm just going to, since you're just jumping from side to side with your slides here, I'll just be moving this around as we're going through there. So we're good to go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be blocking up this beautiful Arabic.
Yeah, this wonderful Quran.
Right.
These are just Jake's claims in case somebody had already forgotten what we talked about, but trying to make sure people remember all the insane stuff that Jake was okay with stating and the things that don't really cohere with the rest of Wahhabi theology or Islam. So Allah's speech is eternal, referring to his ability to speak, but any particular act of speech is not eternal, including the Quran, except that most Muslim scholars and Wahhabis will say that the Quran is Allah's uncreated speech. But if it's uncreated, that means it's eternal. We'll get into that. Preserved tablets as well. The tablet contains the Quran, Torah, and Injil. It's wild that he admitted that that's the case and that it's preserved, but we have no access to them. So what's the point again? Divine will. Allah's will is divided in regards to Allah's revealed scripture. Jake straight up said correct. He was okay with just saying, yep, that's true. That's true. And reasons for preserving only the Quran, not really any good reasons at all. He just said, well, there's independent reasons. We'll get into that. So we'll just look at what Wahhabis believe if Jake actually agrees with them.
Hey, hang on 1 second. I realized I forgot to get to these couple super chats. I don't want to wait
Oh,
till
yeah,
later.
go
In
ahead.
case, I don't want to wait till later just in case some of them are related to what we were watching. So just zoom through these real quick. I just dropped Jake Kondawa on YouTube, new hit. Yeah,
I love Loaves of Bread. They make good music.
So we've got Jake Kondawa. All right, check that out. We will check that out. Don't forget to get flowers. That's good advice for everyone. Don't forget Valentine's Day right around the corner.
That's right.
No comment there from the snowman. Thank you, though. Why does everyone assume the Segueras are Mexican? Because we're Mexican.
Claro. What else could David be?
What else could I be, man?
What?
What?
Look at that. His name's David.
Yeah,
His
what do you
name's
think I am, man?
Wood.
Do I look Venezuelan or something? Come on, be realistic, man. You're crazy. Crazy, yes.
Man, mira vato. Que loco.
Malik gonna say that you hired him to trick everyone to think you're not David Seguera. We on to you, David. Yep.
He will. Oh, just watch. He's gonna be like,
Hey,
oh man, he hired this
chat.
random guy.
Chat, he's still trying to cover up that his real name is David Segura, and he even got this other David S guy. Yeah, look, he's right here. Oh my goodness, this is the proof.
He got a random Puerto Rican. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna hire a Puerto Rican just to pretend. It's a psyop, man. Malik's on to us. There goes her 7,000 shekels.
Let's see. Mi abuela makes awesome homemade tamales.
Hola, abuelita.
If Allah were fully immutable, would that mean he is bound by time, as that is one of the determinants of immutability?
Well, yeah, so if he's fully immutable and timeless, then we could say that he's fully bound to whatever he's always been willing. So So whatever Allah has been willing before creation with his immutable will, he has to continue to will, because that's how immutability works. So it's not that he's bound by time. And oddly enough, he's actually bound by his timelessness. The timelessness is actually kind of the issue for Allah. So yeah, that would be too bad. So sad.
In Islam, to be saved, one has to accept the Quran, Momo, and Allah, right? Isn't that kind of shirk, posing a dilemma about how one is saved? Yeah, so Muslims would say that before Islam, you didn't need to believe in Muhammad because that's or the Quran, because that hadn't been revealed yet. But yeah, and just say there are Quran-only Muslims.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was talking to like serious Quran-only Muslims. I was talking to one in New York, and he was saying, I pointed out, I was like, if you reject the Hadith, wouldn't you reject the 5 pillars? And he said, yeah. And I go, wait, you wouldn't recite the Shahada? And he goes, nah, it's shirk. And I was like, what?
Holy
And
moly,
he goes, yeah, the moment you say there is no God but Allah, and no, that's shirk. Any and after that is shirk. And so I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, you have Quran only Muslims who regard all kinds of the stuff Muslims are saying as shirk.
That's so based.
Very based, very based.
It's the proof.
Let's see. 7 is enough. What about 7 new wingling dilemmas?
Is that Mike?
They're infinite wingling dilemmas. AP, did you switch up your skincare routine? Oh, hi, Mike Winger. Ha ha, good one. So funny. Everyone's so funny.
That's me.
Allah couldn't preserve Jake's capacity to reason.
No. He willed Jake's inability to reason. He willed it.
True.
Remember, it's active.
Muslims have to say that. We need to bring that up. It's like Allah willed you guys to be making the stupidest arguments imaginable, and we can't even blame you because it's Allah's decision, but Allah loves fallacious reasoning.
Yes.
According to you guys.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a super sticker. Thanks. Hey, Ida. If every people should have a revelation in their language, what about Russian, etc.? Most people have no revelation in their language. Yeah, you're correct. Just like English. There was no English back then. So it's just a problem. Muhammad didn't understand how languages work. And so, the Quran is the last revelation because everyone else already had their revelation. The only people who didn't have their revelation were the Arabs, and then Allah revealed the Quran in Arabic. Now everyone had their revelation and everyone had it in their own language. He didn't understand the concept of new languages developing. Yeah. And this is actually connected to one of the dilemmas that David has for us. I don't know if you're covering it here, but I know it's I know it's in your book.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's languages are kind of human bound and temporal, and they change and so on. And so if Allah's eternal speech is connected to this, well, even if Jake doesn't think it's Allah's eternal speech, if his heavenly tablet is connected to these developing languages and so on, some issues might arise from that. Some issues might arise.
True.
Allah's will read upon his death. His will. Everyone hit that like button like you fear disobedience.
434 on them.
Yeah. Fear disobedience from that like button. And
that's right.
David and David are the satanic verses and the men of Al-Zut on the heavenly tablet.
Yes, they are. Because just so you know, the heavenly tablets aren't just the written revelations of Allah. The heavenly tablets have every single event that has ever happened and every single thing that's ever happened in the history of all of forever. Written 50,000 years before creation. What does it mean to write something before time? I don't know. But yes, it does have the Men of Al-Zut written in perfect gold letterings. I'm sure Allah took his time, and the Men of Al-Zut started to mount, and I'm sure it's very important. It was a necessary event.
Being poetic, Dawood 203 is probably part of satanic. Not sure what you mean by part of satanic, but yeah. Sunan Abu Dawud 203. That's the eyes are the leather strap of the anus. Powerful stuff. The gospel has 4 chains, but mutawatir is great.
Mm.
It's always funny because it sounds like mutawatir. Mutawatir.
Mutawatir.
That should be.
I think we know about that.
Hey, you know what'd be funny? We should make like in convenience stores, they have like beside the register those like, ooh, take this pill and you'll last all night long and stuff like that. We should make them in a drink and call it mutawatir, and we'd probably become millionaires from all the Muslims. Like this will help you go all night long, like the men of al zut. I already came up with that for you can't call it zut juice. That sounds gross, but zut energy. I wanted to make an energy drink called Zut Energy. It'll say will help you go all night long, like the men of al zut. But mutawatir would be funny. Mutawatir. It's help you, with your 3 hours with your 3-hour wife in the hotel.
Well, hotels do actually have little places where you can sometimes get some water and a couple refreshments over at the bar. So you could just offer that up to a bunch of hotels in England. Apparently, that's very popular right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Momo Hijab would be quite happy about that product.
Him and I mean, Ali Dawa's already been advertising for Viagra for a long time. But yeah, we could get Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawa to do the marketing in their videos, and like, by the time I go to my next wife, I'm very low energy, and I don't know if I can really do anything with her. And so, first I tried thinking of the men of al zut, but even that's not working. And so this is why I got mutawatir. And awesome commercial. Millionaires. We're instant millionaires.
Wow, that would be a really good idea. We could sell that. Muslims would buy it.
We could definitely sell that.
They'd give that to their dais, and then they'd use it on weed.
Yep. These concepts can be hard to follow. Any tips? Well, yeah, I have to say, I mean, not everything's for everyone. So you can always focus on things you're interested in. If you actually want to learn it, but you want to go slowly, go slowly. Get some introductory stuff and start working through that very, very carefully. What do you got there?
I made like a small companion guide. I just use it for anyone who wants to learn how to do evangelism. So it's super introductory. It's just, how do I talk to atheists, Muslims, Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses, like a couple groups to talk to. And so this is the companion guide. It gives you just, here's some good questions to ask these people so you could have a good conversation. Or, when you're talking to people and like some Muslims, here's some good verses to bring up if they say Jesus never claims to be God. Right. So it's just like a good thing you can kind of carry around with you. I had to make the companion guide because the original version I made ended up being a little bit too large. So instead I was like, well, you can't carry that around. That's dumb. So I instead got this so you can actually carry it around, and you got some journaling at the end. Obviously, we both have studied philosophy at our own times. It's not like this stuff kind of just happens. You're like, oh, I understand how theological and philosophical arguments work. Like, no, this is a process, right? This is a slow. So read the scripture, read the Bible often, because the Bible's filled with Jesus reasoning with people, and even the Pharisees argue with him. So trying to like understand how our Lord communicates with different people is a really good way to start. And then, find some books that teach basic communication theology, and then start talking to people. I learned a lot of stuff just from talking to Jehovah's Witnesses, talking to Muslims. It just helps a lot.
Dais say Jesus spoke Aramaic. Find him in Quran. Well, yeah, Jesus would have spoken Aramaic, but it's just funny because they'll say they have a problem with the Gospels being in Greek, which was the sort of universal language of the time. It had been spread by Alexander the Great's conquest and so on. But so you've got this double irony here about them complaining about that. And the two ironies are, one, according to the Quran, the book Jesus brought is the Injil, which is an Arabic transliteration of the Greek word euangelion. Injil doesn't come from any Aramaic or Hebrew word. It comes from a Greek word, euangelion. So according to the Quran, Jesus' book was in Greek. At least it had a Greek title for some reason. So that's one odd thing. The other odd thing is, you can't go to the gospel because that's in Greek and Jesus spoke Aramaic. Okay, Aramaic is not Arabic. Why does he speak Arabic? Why does he speak Arabic in the Quran?
I actually saw like Dean Responds or someone like that say that, oh, Jesus never spoke Greek in the Injil. And the moment I heard him say that, I was like, so you just said Injil. You recognize that comes from
He
like,
never
Evangelion.
spoke Greek in his Greek book.
Yeah. Like what else do you think? I mean, what is the Quran referring to? It should have used an Aramaic term for the gospel instead, but it didn't.
What do Muslims believe their Jannah rewards are? Well, they might believe all kinds of things, but basically they're going to be standing in corners waiting for their husbands to call on them for sex.
Forever. True.
Just bought The Death of Allah, giving up video games for Lent, so I'll be getting some reading done. Any book recommendations on the Trinity? Well, that book has a lot to do with the Trinity and what happens when you abandon it.
Yeah. I mean, the Death of Allah is meant to show you that the Trinity, legitimately, and I don't mean to oversell this, but I'm at the point, and I think Than from Inspiring Philosophy is the exact same way. I've heard him say it. It is hard for me to imagine any model of God that is unipersonal given the fact of creation. Like a unipersonal God just wouldn't see relationship as an eternally good thing. And so he wouldn't want to make a creation, right? An eternally, unipersonal God would not see the facts about how two persons should interact ideally as a good and desirable thing. So that Unitarian God would never even make moral facts, because moral facts are facts between persons. Well, a Unitarian God would never will moral facts. There's so many things about our creation that just don't make sense unless we have some sort of, I'm not even saying, Trinitarian yet, although that's true. The Trinity is true. I'm saying at the very least, you have to admit that a multi-personal God makes way more sense of the fact of creation and the nature of the world we live in than any Unitarian model. So the book deals with that, but I guess Polythesis' Knowing and the Trinity, it's probably pretty good. It's just nice.
What did you call him?
Yeah, Polythesis, not Polythesis, Polythesis. Yeah, and Knowing and the Trinity. It's good because it takes a good understanding of God and the generation of the Son as causal language, not creational, and that actually leads into my book too. So that's pretty cool.
Right. Let's see. Aren't they just following the example of Muhammad? Just made it up as he went, then declared it to be the word of Allah. Yeah, I was just talking about that in an after party after Avery's debate went live yesterday. And one thing I've noticed, and I don't think we've pointed out enough, when they're saying, what is the Quran's position on the exact meaning of authority and so on, and then we say, well, he says the Torah is the authority for Jews and the Gospel is the authority for Christians. They have to judge by those things, and that the Bible is the authority over whether the Quran is the word of Allah. So that's all authority. Now, but if the Quran says that jizya will be imposed, then it's saying that something from Islam will be authoritative and so on. And so you can't reconcile that with the gospel being the authority for Christians, because it's saying that this can be imposed on the Christians, and therefore what Allah says over here must not mean. They seem to think that we believe that the Quran has some coherent position, and we're trying to get to the coherent position. No, it's the Islamic dilemma shows that the Quran is incoherent. And the fact that your job as Muslims is to come up with a coherent position that accounts for all these verses and actually makes sense and doesn't self-destruct Islam.
Yes.
We've debated you over and over again. You have not been able to do that. So what we're left with is the Quran is just incoherent. So, got to point that out. But yeah, that ties into Muhammad just making it up as he went along. That's a super sticker. Thank you. Hey, back, David. Oh, that's Ida again.
Huh.
And AT Ministries. Anyone else notice how Mike Winger started exposing abusive Christian leaders years ago? And then David did his stream exposing an abusive Christian leader, almost like David wants to be like Mike. No, if I were like Mike,
get canceled.
Yeah, if I were like Mike, I would just attack everyone I'm jealous of, but I don't do that. All right, ready to jump back into this? Are we okay over here, at least until the next slide? We're going to switch sides with everything?
Well, now I don't even want to answer it because it's going to switch again.
That's all right. We're just going to keep moving, everyone.
Yeah. For each of the claims, there's only like 4 big claims that I'm going to focus on. Allah's speech, preserved tablets, preservation, divine will. Actually, just the first 3. Fourth one, Jake didn't even make an argument, so I'm not even going to like pretend to, respond to that. But I'm just going to say what Wahhabis believe. Is Jake consistent with that? And even if he is consistent with them, does that lead to some contradictions? And number 3, what are some new dilemmas and some old ones from my book that can come about? It seems like, again, every time that my dilemmas are tested, then Muslims always find a way to show another issue with Allah, to show another issue with the Quran. It just over and over. It's amazing. It's like a wealth of loss. It's just like a wealth of failure, which makes sense because it's Allah that we're talking about. And so we'll see this here, but are any of Jake's answers heretical? Short answer, yes. Long answer, super yes. Some of them are that Allah has a divided will, which again is a serious issue for Tawhed. As a matter of fact, I kind of feel bad. You'll never hear me say this again, I don't think, but I kind of feel bad for Daniel Hakikachu, because Daniel Hakikachu and Jake just had this like really large debate, right? And Jake was just laying into Daniel Hakikachu, saying, "You're a heretic. You've got all these wrong positions. You're a kafir. You're a kafir." And then Jake does this debate where he says that Allah has a divided will. And I was like, I kind of feel bad for Daniel, right? Jake was able to get all these people to kind of hop on the bandwagon to attack Daniel's positions. Now, yeah, some of Daniel's positions don't fit with standard Islam. But then Jake, very next day, goes around and starts saying Allah has a divided will. So, I don't know. You probably won't hear me ever say ever again in my life that I feel bad for Daniel. But for this instance, I kind of did. I was like,
hard to feel bad for
calling
Daniel.
a heretic. Or like all of this, just all of it. Allah does not will the Quran's preservation. Allah wills the corruption of his own attributes and his own acts of divine speech. Like, it's pretty heretical.
I don't know why you're feeling bad for Daniel. You should be feeling bad for Allah, man.
Well, that's true. He gets all these debaters and these people that all of the Muslims cheer and support, and they're like, "These are our champions." And every single time a Muslim gets a champion, he goes against Allah. It's actually
Like
interesting. Usually
clockwork.
when you raise up champions, it's to go against your enemy. But every time Muslims raise up champions, they go against Allah. It's interesting. Interesting concept. Or at least they go against the Quran, which is Allah's speech. So Allah's speech, simply put, is just, this is just summarizing all the junk that Jake said. We already heard all this stuff, right? It's eternal, but his individual acts of speech are not eternal. Allah's speech is... Don't worry about where that camera's going to go.
I'm going to make it. Here we go. And then, we go.
Perfect. Look at that. It fits in the
Perfect.
corner. Allah's speech is eternal, referring to his ability to speak. Any particular act of speech is not eternal, including the Quran. So apparently Allah is just kind of always, like he's always waiting for the right moment to speak. But it's really just his ability to speak. That's what Jake says. It's his ability to speak, not that he's eternally speaking out. Here's the issue. So all these different sources, and I'm not going to go through them because this is just for the audience to see. These are a bunch of the Wahhabi scholars and a bunch of the different scholars looking at Wahhabi sources who say that Allah has always possessed, these attributes such as knowledge, sight, hearing, speech, which neither cease nor expire. So these just also ironic using the word expire. For milk, right? But also, again, the Quran is the speech of Allah, not created. Wherever it is recited and wherever it is written, it does not change, does not transform, it does not alter. So if the Quran is the speech of Allah and it's not created, that means it's always been with Allah, right? It's always been truly with him. But then even if you go to some other scholars' authory archive, which has all these different authory scholars and Wahhabi scholars, they cite even some Ash'ari scholars who correctly describe, like Wahhabi and Salaf belief. Our path is the path of the Salaf who follow the Quran, Sunnah, and the consensus of the Ummah. Among their beliefs is that Allah has always been complete with all his eternal attributes, which neither cease nor expire. He has always been knowing with his knowledge, seeing with a sight, hearing with a hearing, speaking with a speech. Speaking, it's an act, it's an action. It's not a passive potentiality. It seems to be very clear that it is an active, real reality. And also they go on to say the Quran is the speech of Allah, as are all his revealed books, which means Allah has eternally been speaking all of these books. The Injil has always been on the mouth of Allah. The Torah has always been spoken by him, right? All of these scholars are admitting that the Quran is the speech of Allah, revealed, sent down, not created. And others might say Allah created speech in a location or situation. So the Salaf are like, no, that's crazy. He never created it, right? So all these scholars that are Wahhabi, because that's what we have, right? An Athari Salafi, so that's what Jake is. He's supposed to be in agreement with these people, especially as you're about to see, with like Ibn Uthaym. He's one of the most well-known like modern Salafi scholars, who says in response to Jake, right? This is what he would say in response to Jake. He said, because of this, the attribute of speech is both an essential attribute and an action-based attribute. It is, in its foundation, an essential attribute because Allah has always been and will always be described as speaking, not able to speak only, not potentially speaking, but again, always speaking. And I always keep all the citations if people want to check it out on Athari Archive. It's actually a really good website if you want to learn about Athari beliefs. But I don't know why Jake keeps on going against the Wahhabi position, given the fact that he's Wahhabi, right? Allah has always been speaking. And this just makes sense. If Allah hasn't always been speaking, that means he hasn't always been willed his act of speaking, which means he has to like change in regards to his attribute of speech. So it actually just also like follows theologically. So yeah, does Jake agree with them? Like, no. There's a lot of Wahhabi scholars that say Allah is always speaking. So does Jake actually agree with them? Yeah, not so much. Could you say some might say the Quran and Allah's other acts of speech are just acts of speech? Yeah, maybe. But a lot of them also say the sense of acts of speech is kind of like pulling back a curtain, right? So when we say that there's like times where Allah has acts of speech in time, it's like what he's always been eternally saying, and he just peels back the curtain of reality so that some of it comes out. So it's not like he, went from not speaking to speaking. But if someone like Jake says that, then that means a lot changed, which again is a pretty big issue. So dilemma 1, based off like dilemma 91 but modified, could Allah will the complete preservation of his speech in the Quran while not willing the complete preservation of his speech in the Torah and the Injil? Well, Islam affirms that Allah possesses the attribute of speech. The Quran is presented as Allah's speech sent down, and the Quran itself repeatedly affirms that the Torah and the Injil are also sent down. And obviously sent down is something you only use in Islam to talk about like speech from Allah. So these things are all in the exact same ontological category. They're all in the exact same category. They're Allah's speech, right? Divine speech sent down from Allah. This creates a huge metaphysical pressure because Allah is also confirmed to have a single undivided will. All right. So again, Jake's kind of off his rocker on that. A perfect consistency in willing regarding his own attribute. So Allah is not going to will two opposite ways about one attribute eternally. That means Allah is eternally contradictory. And immutability in terms of his will. So here's a simple rule. Allah cannot will oppositely with respect to the same divine attribute. He can't will opposite things eternally with regard to the same divine attribute. Speech is one attribute, so that leads to a pretty big issue. Horn 1, Allah eternally wills the complete preservation of his speech. If a Muslim wants to say Allah's will is always towards his attribute of speech, that it be preserved when it's manifested on earth. Allah that's how his will works. He always wills the preservation of his acts of speech because they're manifestations of his attribute of speech. Well, that doesn't just go to the Quran. That also would go to the Torah and the Injil, which are also Allah's revealed speech. So, conclusion under Horn 1, if Allah wills preservation of his speech, Islam is false because the Torah and the Injil must still be preserved alongside the Quran. But of course, Horn 2, let's say someone says Allah does not eternally will the complete preservation of his speech, then that would apply again to the Quran and to the Torah and the Injil. So if they say, well, the Torah and the Injil aren't fully and completely preserved in their totality, then we would say, okay, so then Allah's eternal will towards his revealed attributes of speech, his revealed attribute and acts of speech, is that they're not going to be completely preserved, which again applies to every single revelation of speech because he's always willing the same way towards the same attribute. Which means if you say the Torah and the Injil aren't completely preserved, there's the Quran. If you say that the Torah or the Quran is perfectly preserved, you would have to affirm the same about the Torah and the Injil. No matter what you do, it doesn't matter. Islam is false. Either all of Allah's speech revealed is preserved, or Allah's speech is not perfectly preserved. Either way, Islam is false. Again, I'd love to see Muslims, even outside of like Jake's Wahhabi circle, try to actually deal with some of these dilemmas, just so I can maybe see if there's a way to strengthen these. But Allah's will is always going to be immutable, and based off it being based on, from his divine wisdom, regarding the same attribute, which is his speech, he'll always will the same way, because it's always using the same attribute of wisdom to will towards the same attribute of speech eternally with an immutable will. This is just to strengthen the Islamic dilemma even further, so that, no matter what camp Muslims are from, because in the Death of Allah, I also have the first 50 dilemmas are just based off different camps of Islam. So Wahhabi or Salafi, Ash'ari, Mu'tazila, and all the other different ones. So these ones can apply in different ways. But even like a second dilemma, this one's really simple. All divine speech shares one ontological status. Divine speech does not guarantee preservation. The conclusion is either all divine speech is preserved or it's not preserved. Just another way to say it specifically for Wahhabis. So this is, a slight extension. I'm wondering how Jake would actually try to answer this, since he seems to not exactly be in full agreement with Wahhabi or Salaf scholars. So I'd have to see what he's thinking, if he's watching or ever thinking about that. But those are just two dilemmas for that one. And the next two dilemmas would be for the preserved tablets. So any questions on that first couple?
Who are you asking, me?
Or anyone in the audience. I wasn't sure if anyone sent in any questions or super chats about those ones.
We've got some super chats. Anyone have any questions on anything presented here so far? He's gone through two. Now he's going on to some preserved tablet dilemmas. Let's see. No, they're all arguing with some dingaling who keeps spouting complete nonsense over here.
Oh, okay. Nice. Perfect. I see all those random people. All right, that's cool. Nice. Yeah. Preserved tablet. So this one actually pretty simple. He said, preserved heavenly tablet exists, which contains the Quran, Torah, and Injil, written in their original earthly languages, and we have no access to the heavenly tablets. So what do the Wahhabi scholars say? They claim that, actually, this is really interesting. So Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, he's not a Salafi himself, but a lot of authorities and Salafis will cite him to support their beliefs.
Well, he's one of the goats of commentators.
Yeah, it's like pretty amazing. And what he ends up saying is the speech of Allah uncreated, no matter how it is written, where it is recited, or in what location it is read, whether it is found in the heavens or the earth, whether preserved in a preserved tablet, written in the tablets of children in schools, inscribed on stones, written on paper, memorized in the heart, or uttered with the tongue, it remains the Quran. So wherever that speech of Allah is, the Quran, it remains the Quran. Whoever says otherwise or claims that there is a Quran in the earth or the heavens other than the Quran we recite with our tongues and write in our masahif, or believes differently in their heart, such a person is a disbeliever in Allah, deserving of having their blood shed, dissociated from Allah, and Allah is disassociated from them.
Come on, Jake. You're in all kinds of trouble according to Tabari, man.
It's like bad, like really, really bad, right? Because now Jake might be thinking, well, I didn't claim that there is a Quran other than, on the heavens or the earth, other than what we recite. But he actually did when he first said, Allah does not will the preservation of the Quran on earth, but Allah does will the preservation of the Quran in the heavenly tablets in heaven. Why does that sound like, there's an other Quran? Well, because Allah's disposition towards these two Qurans is different. So they're going to have different properties or different aspects about them, right? The property of the Quran in the heavenly tablets is going to be that of immutability and preservation, necessary preservation, necessary immutability. The property of the Quran on earth is going to be non-necessary preservation, non-immutability, and at least non-preservation willed by Allah. So yes, you actually could say, now to be very clear, I'm not saying that people should follow through with what Al-Tabari is saying here, okay? I'm not saying that any Muslim should actually listen to him when he says that they should have their blood shed. Jake should not have his blood shed. Seems actually like a pretty okay guy, right? He should not. What I am saying, though, is that Jake made a very big blunder by so haphazardly and, not really thinking about it, saying that the Quran on earth and the Quran in heaven are actually pretty distinct in Allah's mind. That means that they're other than what we recite out of necessity. But again, that's from a well-known commentator. I'm not saying that you actually should listen to this guy. Jake should not be harmed whatsoever, okay? I'm just saying this guy is saying that this puts Jake at a disassociation from Allah and Allah dissociated from Jake. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, also, again, all the other scholars say that the heavenly tablets are protecting and guarding this is interesting, they're actually acting as a protection and a guardian for the Quran and the other speech of Allah on earth somehow. So you might be thinking, well, again, this what's the point of this heavenly tablet? Like, what's the point if we don't have any access to it and nobody has access to it, which, by the way, Jake is correct. All the Wahhabi scholars agree. Nobody has access to the tablets, so that's true. It's very clear, though, if you're actually reading from Ibn Kathir and a couple others, Ibn Kathir explains, there is nothing that Allah has decreed, the Quran, what preceded it and what came after it, so the Torah and Injil, right? Except that it is in the preserved tablet, in the tablet that is preserved between the eyes of Israfil. So the whole idea is this. Everything that Allah has decreed is in those tablets. Every single event, every single revelation, it's all in those tablets. And apparently, so you read up here too, he is protecting its meanings from being twisted, just as he is protecting its words from being changed. So it turns out, Allah willing the preservation of the Quran, and apparently also all the other speeches too, on the preserved tablet, is his way of metaphysically grounding the preservation of the Quran, and I would add, all the other speech of Allah too, on earth. So it seems like there is a function of this heavenly tablet, and it's supposed to be the grounding of the earthly revelations, even if Jake doesn't recognize that. So does Jake actually agree with the scholars? Like, yeah, kind of. He agrees that nobody has access to the heavenly tablets, and he agrees with many of the scholars that there are real languages of those revelations in the tablets. But him agreeing with them actually is kind of an issue for Wahhabism, like Salafism, because this leads to an inconsistency or a contradiction with other Wahhabi claims. Allah's preservation of the Quran on earth being linked with or substantiated by his preservation of the Quran in the heavenly tablets would also mean the same for, again, and if you say, oh, Allah also preserved the languages that are being used, Arabic, Hebrew, and obviously Injil, which, funny that you mentioned this, David, because I did too, Injil, which was in Greek, and which a Muslim should affirm, since the Arabic word for Injil is literally just a transliteration of the Greek word evangelion. So we're on the same page there. It's very clear Allah is willing even the preservation of the languages for this speech before it happens.
Hold up.
But this does lead to a couple issues.
Hold up. What do we have here? Whoa, I follow this guy on Instagram, and he's only got like 1,000 followers, and now he's on David's channel. I was like, I swear I've seen this guy somewhere.
No way.
You're on Instagram, man?
Yeah. That's where all those Muslims that leave those annoying comments about my books. That's right. Same name as the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
By the way.
Just so you all know, I've known my cousin David S.
Yeah.
Since we were kids.
We in the womb, man. Man, we were back then, man.
Yeah.
Shoot.
See, you don't know how it was back in Mexico back then.
Claro, man.
Yeah, David S. We come from a poor family that couldn't afford to send us to philosophy school, so we had to learn philosophy on the streets, man. We was doing some real crimes, but we was learning the philosophy as well.
I was
now
like,
we use it to wreck Islam.
When the police got me, I'd be like, why? Like, why is it wrong and stuff, man? Like, back up, hermano. Mira, este hombre, este cerdo. That's how you say pig. right? Like, mira ese cerdo que increíble, no puedo ir. Yeah, we learned on the streets, dude.
And now we see these dawa arguments, and we turn them into chicharrones de puerco. Ese. That's some of the only Spanish I know, is just because I used to get pork rinds that said chicharrones de puerco on it. So
That stuff is actually so good, though. I love chicharrones. It's so good. Holy moly! Oh, now I'm hungry. Why'd you do that? Nah. Shoot. Wait. De puerco, de cerdo. Oh, that's haram. That's haram. Look at what we're gonna be eating now. That's actually wild that I have an Instagram person here of all places. That's crazy. Yeah. As you can see, I'm sure I'll get a lot of angry Muslim comments, just like I did with my one time I posted one dilemma from here and got 300.
you're not gonna get mean comments here, man, because they're used to way more messed up stuff. They're just happy we're not eating the Quran right now.
That's such a good point.
Like,
You
so
set
happy.
the bar so low.
Yeah, I know. Like anyone who's not eating the Quran is like an angel to them.
Whoa, look at that. I'm actually Jibril. I'm Jibril. Or I'm that, what was that? MDL, call B. I'm Jibril. That's exactly right. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. And just as we were saying, this does seem to reveal an inconsistency or contradiction with the other Wahhabi claims. Allah's act of speech is like all these acts of speech are dependent on language and their syntax, grammar, and human usages. This makes Allah seem kind of dependent on human-made languages that change over time, that are dependent on audiences, that are dependent on the audience's usages of those words, because there's like a kind of linguistic determinism to it. So how is the audience using this? Allah's like, okay, now I have to use this word in that way. Which again, if you held to like a more active, more dynamic model of God, like Christians do, be it like a dynamic omniscience view of God, or just like the beauty of the natural Trinitarian God who's just naturally communicative, no issue, right? But the issue is you're dealing with a Tawhed God who is eternally static. So him being dependent on human-made languages seems to go against what a lot of Muslims will say. So no easy way out. Little Allah here writing with his pencil on the tablets. That's just what's going to happen.
And even in you can see some of the issues here, like even on a just practical level and so on. I'm saying this because earlier in the day, this was not public. It was a discussion with Christian apologetics group in Europe, and they had a Muslim who wanted to discuss the Islamic dilemma. So I was discussing the Islamic dilemma with him and so on. And as his response, one of the responses he gave, it was cool. It was a nice conversation and so on. He wasn't mean or anything. But one of his responses was that in Surah 5, verse 48, where it uses the word Muhammad, it actually means that the Quran is a corrector of the previous scriptures and so on. And what's crazy is you go, one, that's not what the word means at all. But two, you go to the commentaries and you'll get like 30 different meanings, even according to their classical commentaries, on what the word means. And it's like, why? Well, I mean, so Allah in his speech, like puts this word in the Quran, and Muslims themselves can't even figure out what in the world the word means. Why? Because, languages can be complex. Words can have multiple meanings and so on. And then words can change meanings over time. And one meaning can be popular for a while, and then another meaning can become popular. The word gay, for example, that used to mean one thing, it means something different. So you've got words like that, but you can see why, differences arise and so on. And so that's the idea. It's like, that's what human languages are. But then Allah makes his speech in one of these human languages that is constantly evolving and changing, and then you can't even figure out what he's saying. It's kind of weird stuff going on.
And again, he could have willed different sets of like rules for languages. He could have willed a group of people with a language that was very, very stable and steady and unchanging, like no homophones, no words with like multiple meanings at all, right? He could have willed that, but again, Allah just chose not to. And it's just weird because it's like, wow, you could have made this so easy, but you chose to go out of your way to make this as challenging as possible and to make every argument for the faith that you claim points to you being as difficult as possible too, over and over and over. Now, this one we talked about a little bit before. It's actually, again, pretty simple, so we can breeze through it. The function of the preserved tablet. Again, we're thinking, oh, it's useless, right? It's just what is it, like a recording? It's just a recording of stuff. Well, there is a preserved tablet. It contains all divine revelation. What is written in the Lal Mahut, or whatever it is, the heavenly tablets, is willed, decreed, and protected by Allah. And Wahhabi Tafsir explicitly links Quranic preservation on earth to its inscription in the heavenly tablets. So
Hold up. Hey, hold
go
on.
ahead.
Hang on. You know what this just reminded me of? This preserved tablet, but meanwhile all the other books are being corrupted, but there's this preserved tablet that's pretty useless. It reminds me originally the Quran was just meant to be memorized. You read in the Muslim sources about them writing down verses on bones and palm leaves and flat stones and so on. Well, guess what? If you're writing something on flat stones, you're not writing a book. You're not trying to compile a book there. These were aids to memory. It's, hey, we just got a new verse. Let's jot it down so that as we're all trying to memorize it, someone's got it written down and can actually, read it out to us or something like that. But the point was for the Quran to be memorized and recited. Turns out that is a pretty crap way to preserve a book. There's a Chinese proverb, the weakest ink will outlast the strongest memory. And Muslims found that out the hard way when Abu Bakr sent a bunch of the people who had parts of the Quran memorized into battle, and they got crushed, and a bunch of them died. They eventually won the battle, but a bunch of them died, and they lost parts of the Quran forever. In response to that, in response to losing a bunch of the Quran, Abu Bakr said, we need to have a written copy. The purpose of the written copy was so that they wouldn't lose any more. So he gets Zayd ibn Thabit to write down the entire Quran. And then they just keep it in a house. This was not meant to be passed around and copied and things like that. It was just so that, hey, if more people die who have the Quran memorized, then we'll at least have this copy, and so we won't actually lose it. We've got a copy. But imagine you've got that copy of the Quran, what was left of the Quran after some of it had already been lost. But imagine you had that copy of the Quran sitting in your house, and meanwhile, in the rest of the world, the Quran's just being corrupted left and right, and people are coming up with their own Qurans and fighting over the Qurans and so on. Guess what? Because guess what? That happened, right? They were on the verge of fighting over the Quran. That's why Uthman decided we have to start burning all the Qurans and stuff and just issue a standardized one. But imagine you had a preserved copy of the Quran in your house, and everywhere else in the world, the Quran's just being corrupted. And all you do is keep it to yourself and never share it as the Quran's being corrupted. Wouldn't that be really, really weird? And yet it's what Jake is saying Allah did. He had his heavenly tablet and stuff like that of all the scriptures, and that's as good as gold. Allah really has that well protected and well guarded, even though it's completely useless to everyone. But meanwhile, he allowed his revelations to be corrupted,
like all over the place, right?
But he's got that tablet stored up. It's completely useless. Like if you had a preserved tablet of the Quran and everywhere else it was being corrupted, but you kept it, and hey, I got a good one. It's completely useless because I'm keeping it to myself. Anyway, just want to point out there's like weird stuff.
It's true. Now there's a sense in which I think, and again, I do argue in the death of Allah, especially the second one, that it makes sense that Allah would be like illogical in his selfishness, because Allah does not see generosity or sharing of information or himself as like an eternally good thing, because he's by himself forever. So of course he's going to see like Tawhed, he's going to see aloneness, oneness, non-relational states as a perfect way to be. So of course Allah would just have all these weird, random, selfish desires, right? Why? Because he's just always been by himself. So he sees like aloneness and selfishness to be more desirable. It's So that actually kind of makes sense. Allah's like, well, at least I have the tablet. It's like, yeah, but you're Allah. You don't need anything. He's like, yeah, but at least I have it. So you just got these random massive tablet. And it's a big one according to the sources. But it's either that like this heavenly tablet, that's, Law Mahfuz, functions as a decretive guarantee of what Allah wills to occur in history, all the divine revelation and all that, or it functions as a purely like historical record with no earthly realization, right? Maybe it's not guaranteeing that anything stays preserved on earth. Maybe it's kind of just like a little history book. It's like, well, this is what it was, but it has no effect on the divine revelation on earth. Well, let's just go with Horne, that the heavenly tablets, their preservation is actually decretive. Like, it's the reason you can trust that the Quran on earth is preserved too. It protects the wording, the meaning, the letters of what is written there, and it has some sort of like tied, united effect with the speech on earth as well. Well, if the Quran is preserved on earth because it's preserved in the law, right? So in the heavenly tablets, then everything written in the law is divine speech must be preserved on earth, which goes for the Torah and the Injil, which means Jake can't deny their preservation. But obviously, Hornby, maybe someone will say, no, it's just like a history book. Allah was just like, just for my sake, because I forget things. I don't know. I forget things. I'm Allah. What can I say? I forget revelations. I'm just going to put it down so I don't forget it, right? Just like Abu Bakr, just got to make sure I got it memorized. So I'm just going to put it down for me to memorize. And then that'll be it. It's just for memory, just for historical reflection as Allah wants to. But no, it has nothing to do with preservation of the books on earth. It has no link. Let's say that's the case. Then the law can no longer be used as proof of Quranic preservation, divine protection, or a distinction maker between Quran and earlier books. Well, here's the issue then. No matter which way you go, either you say you can't actually see the Quran as being like necessarily preserved, or you say that the Quran is preserved, but so is the Torah and the Injil. No matter which way you go, the Torah and the Injil are either preserved or the Quran is not preserved with necessity. That's it, right? You just either the Torah and Injil are good or the Quran is not, alongside the Torah and the Injil. And obviously, same thing here, but like slightly modified. Is it protecting the meaning? Is it protecting the words? According to Ibn Kathir, Allah is protecting through the tablets and through his will the location, wording, letters, and meanings. Well, either Allah protects divine speech as such, the words and meanings, or Allah selectively protects only one instance of divine speech without grounding, without any reason, right? So either whenever Allah has divine speech as such, per se, words and meanings, he's going to just wholesale preserve it because his wisdom would say, oh, if I do it once, obviously I do it always because I eternally will the same outcome for the same divine wisdom. Or he's like, nah, forget my divine wisdom, my immutable will, and like my evaluations. There's only one that I actually care about. So if divine speech is as such is a protected and preserved category, Torah and Injil are included. But if protection is just arbitrary, he's like, I don't know, I just don't feel like it. Quranic preservation loses its theological necessity. And here's the issue with that. Wahhabis are not actually allowed to say that Allah's choices are arbitrary or done without perfect accord with his divine wisdom, as his decisions are made in accordance with his wisdom, and his wisdom is immutable alongside his will regarding decisions that it is good to will the preservation of divine speech. So either Wahhabi theology is wrong, and sorry, Jake, got to leave Wahhabism, or Islam in general is false, right? That's up to Jake. So Jake can see this and he can be like, I no longer wish to be Wahhabi. He can do that so that he can at least, for this dilemma right here, avoid having to say that Islam is false. But that means he'll have to actually leave Wahhabism. But if Jake is convinced that Wahhabism, Salafism is the right way for Islam, then he can't leave it, which means that Islam in general is false because the Torah and the Injil are preserved. But that's up to Jake. I would recommend he does leave Islam and Wahhabism. But again, just to give Jake a few props here on this one, Jake is 100% in line with Wahhabi views that the heavenly tablets are inaccessible to us. So, good for him. That is true. It's just we can't do anything. Nobody can.
Got a couple things right, Jake.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, it happens, right? Broken clock strikes, right, twice a day. So he got something. The next section, before we move on, we'll see if anyone has any questions. But this is the one that's really important here. I mean, all of it works, but this is like the divine will stuff that gets really weird, right? Allah's will is divided, and he willed to preserve part of it, but also he says he does not will preservation of his speech, so he contradicts himself. So pretty important section.
Take up super chats here. Slightly off topic question. Is there any theories or explanations as to why God would allow polytheism, etc.? Personally, I believe that God could do whatever he wants, but was wondering on topic of that. Yeah, that would just be like one particular example of what would normally be the problem of evil. Why does God allow people to do horrible, awful things? And so this would just be like a theological version of it. And so lots of responses to the problem of evil would have similar reasoning to responding to this. If God's going to allow us to freely make choices and so on, well, we may end up misusing our freedoms and so on. But yeah, you have all kinds of responses. You have any thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, no, I mean, the issue is if God did not allow polytheism, which, would be a false belief about the nature of something, then it would also, we'd have to kind of keep on going and say like, well, why doesn't God allow us to just have no false beliefs at all? Right? Because that's a false belief. Well, God could have just prevented us from having any false beliefs, right? Well, God should make it so we only have true beliefs. Well, okay, God, I guess could have made a world where we all have just true beliefs, but then you kind of get into a question about if that's a world that God sees as like axiologically, I shouldn't say it, valuable. I don't have to use that word. Does God see this world as valuable? All right. If it's just a bunch of robots, as C.S. Lewis would say, a world of automatons, then God might not see it as valuable. So, I think God actually wants a valuable world with an interesting narrative. And if he's just preventing us from having the possibility of being wrong, then maybe there's something being lost, like a second order good of learning or humility. Like, ooh, I was wrong. Now I got to admit that I was wrong. My bad. Maybe there's some benefits of that humility. So I don't
know. TikTok Dawa is trying gotchas from rules of logic. Yeah, they never really understand rules of logic. They violate them all day. Jake said on Fearless Truth Stream that Allah's 99 attributes had different ontologies. Yes, this was
holy moly, dude. That is so, that made me freak out.
I was powerful Dawa.
There's no way he actually just said, and it's recorded too. That junk was clipped. He straight up said there were 99 ontologies. I was like, you're a metaphysician. Like at least you call yourself a metaphysician. No further slight to Jake. I'm not trying to be like overly aggressive on this. I think my dilemmas are doing that themselves. But if you're gonna take the choice, you're gonna make the choice to call yourself a metaphysician, then you should at least be very careful about the kind of metaphysical language you're using, especially when it comes to stuff like ontologies. That's all. That's all I'll say on
that. Abba must be feeling proud. Jesus must be smiling. The Holy Spirit must be pumping iron, and the angels must be having a party. Yeehaw, hallelujah. That's a pretty good year. Allah guides those who seek his Ridvan. AP equals AP, ways of peace, brings them out of darkness and into his light by his will and guides them to the straight path. Yes, this is how we know that according to the Quran, AP is a true prophet. Praying for protection for you soldiers in Christ. Thank you. Why don't Dawa use the Quran, Rasam, to rewrite? You're saying like they could use that to... What do you mean? Like they would want to rewrite it? I guess if they don't like what Allah says in all these verses, they could use that's like the skeletal text without all the markings and stuff on it. I guess if you're saying why don't they use that to start rewriting some of these parts? I guess they could.
You know what's going to happen, right? They're going to get a Q Quran, just like how Dean Response keeps on bringing up the Q Gospel. Now Muslims are going to actually call for critical scholarship, so that they can find a way to figure out what the original Quran really said. So they're going to find the Q Quran, and the Q Quran is going to say all of the arguments that they're arguing for currently.
And Uzair equals Ezra, not Ezra. Not Ezra. Ezra equals Israel. 930 means Jews say Israel are sons of God. Jews and Christians are wrong for saying with mouths and not believing in their hearts. I'm guessing you're joking here. Thanks for the answers, guys. Yeah. Thanks, Ida. And 1 second here. 1 second. Hang on. They're kind of arguing, but there's some.
I see Mary in the chat. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, she's over there arguing with everybody.
And
very
Thaddeus.
rude. She's being very rude to people.
Oh,
let's see.
nice.
Let's see. When Mo talks about scriptures with Allah, he's meaning a physical copy of the Bible with his father Waraka. Interesting.
All of his daddy issues. Allah is supposed to be like the dad figure for him.
Let's see.
I think you guys are onto something with the whole daddy issues. By the way, I think there's probably something.
Oh,
legitimate
totally.
to
Oh,
it.
he's totally messed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading Faith of the Fatherless, and then what he says at the end about people before atheism, it's like he's like perfect description of Muhammad's entire life.
Wow.
Eternal tablets with Allah, yet we don't get to see originals. Why? Left us with imperfect texts. If Quran's legit, it shows Allah don't care. His previous words become corrupt. Not a good God to worship.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the Muslim's going to say, no. It's not that he allowed his words to become corrupt. It's actually good. He willed their corruption, which is not better, by the way, because then that means that he doesn't actually value the stuff he says. I agree.
All right. Let's jump into
Perfect.
this.
And this one right here, which is really the part we'll be, focusing on because it's kind of wild what he says. He does not will preservation of his speech, but then later on, Jake says Allah's will is divided in that he did will to preserve the Quran, just not the other scriptures. So go ahead.
No, just said powerful.
Yeah, it is powerful.
Da was very powerful.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, especially with the Wahhabi scholars. Let's see what they said to Jake's claim that that apparently the Quran was not preserved, but then later Jake says that it was. So Ismail Ibn Riq, in his really interesting article revisiting the meaning of the divine preservation of the Quran with special references to verse 59, it's like an academic article. So he goes into these different aspects of like Ibn Abbas, who considers the process first from the heavenly preserved tablets to the closest heaven, and then like what happens is the heavenly tablets and the closest heaven kind of just pour out. So somehow the tablets are kind of just like pouring out piecemeal knowledge to Muhammad right here. So they intersect at the heavenly tablets. But then he also explains, no, other people say this. For example, all these verses point out the messenger Gabriel, who brought the revelation to the prophet, was immaculate, reliable, and holy. So this is really interesting. You're about to see that Gabriel is actually the reason that the heavenly tablets are connected to the earthly Quran and the earthly speech. So he was immaculate, reliable, and holy. These verses contain two significant meanings, one of which is that the vehicle that brings a holy book like the Quran to the prophet is a pure and holy one who is free from all kinds of stains and contamination, which indicates the perfection of the messenger, Gabriel, and message, the Quran. So this scholar is pointing out, well, you see, the connection between the heavenly tablets and the earthly revelation is Gabriel, is the messenger. And so you can trust that he's bringing you the preserved text from the heavenly tablets because he himself is reliable, immaculate, and holy. And so he's like the connection between these heavenly tablets and the earthly revelations. And the second meaning is that the presentation of Gabriel in the form of a clean, reliable spirit is to reveal the uprightness and cleanliness of the prophet. It means the purest messenger brings the purest message. Now, here's the issue. Let's just say we go with this kind of Wahhabi or this more interesting scholarly take.
Hang on, no. You didn't finish that sentence, man.
Oh, what, for this one? All the way down here?
Finish the sentence.
this let's just go with this Wahhabi scholar.
No. To put it more clearly, it means that the
Oh,
purest
yeah.
messenger. Go ahead, read it.
Mhm.
Read it.
Well, to put it more clearly, it means that the purest messenger, the mediator angel, brings the purest message, the Quran, to the purest receiver, Prophet Muhammad.
Muhammad is the purest. He's the best of receivers, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. You know, I didn't actually read that. I didn't read that before I put all that in red. I'm sure there's at least 30 people who would agree with that statement. I'm sure there's at least 30 people. So the Wahhabi scholar is making this claim, and I think it actually makes quite a bit of sense, this connection between the heavenly and the earthly tablets. But here's the issue, David, and everybody watching. Well, let's just say this is correct, right? That the reason that the heavenly tablets are preserving the earthly tablets is because, like, Jibril, there's this mediator that's going from the perfectly preserved stuff in heaven and kind of bringing it down to earth. Well, then all we have to do is see if the Torah and the Injil also had equal or greater heavenly messengers, heavenly communicators, and then we'll know if they have equal preservation status. Well, how was the Torah given to Musa, in the Quran? I know. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Magic.
Yeah, exactly, magic. Allah is just like speaking, and it just kind of happens over time. It actually doesn't really explain how in the Quran, but it actually says Allah is the one speaking through the burning bush to Moses.
Moses is the speaker with Allah.
So this is interesting, because now this means that there's an even better mediator for the Torah than just the angel Gabriel. In the case of the Torah, it's straight up Allah. Allah is the direct mediator. He's the one speaking. That's pretty huge. So if we can say that, oh, we can trust the Quran is being preserved from the heavenly tablets to the earthly revelations through, I don't know, someone like Jibril, then we would have to say, of course, it's even more well-preserved, even more reliable for the Torah. Now, of course, the question is also, well, how was the Injil revealed? Well, it was revealed to Jesus, by the sounds of it, directly by Allah, in some equal or better way than what happened with Jibril and Muhammad. So then we have equal or greater reason to trust the preservation of the Injil from the heavenly tablets if we take this interpretation. So obviously, if you can trust Jibril as connecting the heavenly tablets to the earthly revelation, then you can definitely trust the same for the Torah and the Injil instead of just the Quran. Which is beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. And obviously there's like other people too. You know, some of them are like, the Quran is the word of God, revealed and uncreated. From him it began, and to whom it returns. By the Quran, the Torah, the Gospel, and other divine words, he, the Exalted, does not create anything separate from him. Yes, all of these are actually eternal, uncreated speech of Allah. He speaks by his will and power, and his words are self-subsistent, not created or distinct from him. Right? So the Torah is not created. The Quran is not created. The Injil is not created. And they're not even distinct from him, if you really want to try to mess with your idea of what Tawhed means. And the words of God are endless. So they've always been. They're just eternal. All right? They're eternal. Well, if they're eternal, then you might start to think, shouldn't that mean that they're preserved? Well, we'll get to that. And he goes on to say, eventually in the bolded part down here, and if God has spoken through the Quran, the Torah, and other books, with their meanings and words, the regular letters of it, none of that was created. Rather, that was the speech of the Lord of the worlds. Right? So obviously Allah would will these things that are these eternal aspects of himself. And they're all in the same category. They're all like his eternal aspects. So they're all ontologically the same. And then you go into what I was guessing a Muslim would talk with you about. And I was right, thank God. I'm sure some Muslims talk to you after the debate about the will of Allah and how there's different wills of Allah, right? There's at least two different wills. There's the al-irada, which is the universal determined will of Allah. So what is meant by this? It's just all-encompassing. Every event, every occurrence, every action, every single thing and person that ever comes to be is part of this will of Allah. It's everything that Allah wills, his actions, what he brings into existence. It includes what he loves and what he is not pleased with, such as belief or disobedience. So Allah has this eternal will of things that he loves and things he doesn't love. Why is Allah eternally willing things he doesn't love? I don't know, but he is. And it is bound to occur as he has written and decreed it. So look at this. Allah has the ability to will something that has to happen, like the preservation of his speech, right? The preservation of his manifestations of speech, for instance. And then the other one is the al-irada ad-diniya, which is like the religious legislative will of Allah. So it's the stuff that he wishes would happen, but won't necessarily happen. And this is the ultimate will of all the stuff that will happen, even if it's stuff he doesn't want to happen. But this is all still considered like one will. So they would actually say this is not a divided will, even though Jake admitted that it is a divided will. They would, most Wahhabi scholars would say, no, it's not divided. And even Taymiyyah would end up saying that all these people from before who go against Wahhabi thought are wrong, because we can actually see the correct Salafi understanding of Allah's will and how he wills. In the red here, Ibn Taymiyyah says, therefore, what is correct by consensus of the Imams of the Salaf and supported by sound reason and authentic reports is that Allah does what he wills and speaks when he wills, and nothing of this entails deficiency or imperfection. So he does what he wills, he speaks what he wills, and even though he can do it whenever he wills, so he does it in time, that doesn't change his timelessness somehow. They don't say how, they just say somehow it doesn't. And Jake does agree, kind of, that Allah's will, well, Jake agrees that Allah willed the preservation of the Quran and did not will the preservation of the Torah and the Injil, but he also does not agree with the Wahhabi scholars, because Jake said Allah does not will the preservation of the Quran. They're like, no, he most definitely did. They actually insist on that fact. And then also Allah's will is divided, right? Allah's will is divided. They would insist, no way. Allah's will is not divided. Allah's will is one and undivided because of Tawhed. So Jake often ends up accidentally disagreeing with some of these Wahhabi scholars. Not that it matters, though, because even if Jake was in pure agreement with them, they're wrong too. Like, does Allah will the preservation of his speech on earth or not? You can just say, well, given the fact that Allah wills all things, like legitimately everything, then that means Allah easily could have just willed the preservation of his Injil and Torah, just as he does with the Quran. He easily could have. So either Allah did will the preservation of his speech on earth, or he did not will the preservation of his speech on earth. If he did, that applies to the Torah and the Injil, since they're all divine speech, right? And a Muslim could say, well, no, according to Allah's wisdom, he willed the preservation of the Quran, but not the Torah and the Injil. Here's the issue. I have it right here. The Quran's earthly preservation is an effect of divine will. Divine will does not arbitrarily change per instance. So you can't just say, oh, well, for this instance of his divine speech, the Torah and the Injil, he didn't will their preservation, but for the Quran, he did. Well, no, it doesn't arbitrarily change per instance of the same attribute, since it is in accordance with the same immutable will and the same unchanging wisdom regarding the same attribute of speech. So it's not like you can just change from one instance of his will or his speech to another. That would seem to go against Allah using the same wisdom in regards to willing the same attribute's outcome. Now, a Muslim would say, well, Allah did not will the preservation on earth. That's what Jake said. Well, then the Quran's preservation is accidental, sociological. Maybe they just had like really good Muslim societies, but there's nothing about Allah that actually forces that to happen. So either Allah wills preservation of divine speech on earth, which means that our Bible is good, or Quranic preservation ceases to be a divine guarantee, so you can't really trust the Quran as anything special. And if a Muslim says, oh, well, it's just arbitrary. Allah wills what he wills. There's no reason. Well, actually, Wahhabis can't say that. Jake straight up said to you when you were talking to him, he said, there's nothing within Allah's nature that requires him to preserve any scripture, not even the Quran. Wild claim, by the way. Well, Wahhabis confirm Allah acts with hikmah, wisdom. He does nothing.
But Jake does not.
Yes, no, of course.
With hikmah.
Yeah, well, he doesn't need to because he's trying to emulate Allah. But at least the Wahhabis claim that Allah acts with some type of hikmah. He does nothing in vain, so it's not like truly arbitrary. There's a true wisdom, a real hikmah, and it's not irrational arbitrariness. Well, then here's the dilemma. Either Allah's decision to preserve the Quran is arbitrary, which means Wahhabism is false, or it is grounded in wisdom intrinsic to divine speech, which means now it has to be done to all acts of divine speech. So again, let's just say preservation is arbitrary, then Quranic preservation has no theological explanation, and you also have to get rid of what Ibn Taymiyyah says, and you have to get rid of Wahhabism, so sorry, Jake, too bad. Or you go with Horn B, preservation is wisdom grounded, so divine speech is revealed for guidance, right? The gospel actually is a guidance and a light for mankind. The Torah really is, has guidance and light. So divine speech is revealed for guidance that can be corrupted, defeats its own purpose, and preservation follows from the goodness and the wisdom and purpose of revelation. So, consequence, Torah and Injil revealed for guidance fall under the same wisdom preservation, or fall under the same wisdom, so preservation applies equally, just like it would for the Quran. So either Allah preserves scripture for no reason at all, which goes against the authority position, or preservation follows from the purpose of divine speech, which again means we can trust the Torah and the Injil. All of this, over and over, gives us a good reason to trust the Torah and the Injil. And that's actually the end for those 6 dilemmas, because your 7th dilemma is the one that you actually made about Allah's argument. And that argument is actually pretty clear. That Allah just failed to will a logical argument eternally.
Yeah, if anyone was not here earlier, I pointed out, so Allah's main argument for why Jews and Christians should believe in Muhammad and the Quran is that Muhammad and the Quran are confirming our scriptures. But we look at our scriptures and they don't line up. So what's going on here? Muslims say, your scriptures have been corrupted. And we say, well, how is Allah confirming our scriptures then? He's confirming what parts? And how do we know which, how do we know which parts of our books we're supposed to believe? And what's going on here? And they tell us that what we're supposed to do, what the Quran's really saying, is that we go to the Quran, we have to assume that it's the word of Allah, and then we figure out everything the Quran says. Then we go to the Bible and we take out everything that disagrees with the Quran, and what's left is what the Quran is confirming. And so
Powerful.
We've all been pointing out that is circular, right? This is supposed to be something that convinces us. It's supposed to be an argument for Jews and Christians to believe in the Quran. And it requires us to believe in the Quran at the start. We have to believe in the Quran, so we believe that's the revelation, that's the correct revelation. And then we take that correct revelation and we use it to judge our scriptures, and we throw out all the parts that don't line up. So that's circular. Well, guess what? If Allah hadn't allowed the previous scriptures to be corrupted, then the argument wouldn't be circular, right? It would still be I think it would still be a crap argument, but it wouldn't be circular. We wouldn't have to assume that the Quran is the correct book and the perfect speech of Allah and then use that to take out all the rest of the parts. We would just, if he had preserved these books, we would see that they line up and we can make our decision based on that. So since Allah willed, according to the Quran to confirm these previous scriptures, and these previous scriptures to be confirmation of the Quran by agreeing with them, but then he allows them to be corrupted, his will for them to be corrupted actually thwarted his plans for the previous scriptures confirming the Quran. And so it's basically Allah could have given I can't call it a sound argument, but he could have given a non-fallacious argument or a fallacious argument, and he chose the fallacious argument, and so on. So anyway, we could turn that into a dilemma somehow. But
that's right. We're going to call that the ineptitude dilemma. Allah's just inept. He just can't. Just can't do it. Right. It's a circular dilemma.
Yeah, something like that. I would put, okay, either Allah preserved the previous scriptures or he didn't. If he preserved the previous scriptures, then well, guess what? They don't line up with the Quran, and therefore the Quran is false. Or Allah didn't preserve the previous scriptures, and he made his main argument fallacious. And so he decided that circularity is preferable to having just a crap argument. It's better to be fallacious. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we could figure that out, but not looking good, man. Not looking good for Islam. We've presented, like most of the time, we've presented pretty basic formulations of the Islamic dilemma. As you're kind of showing, you can go into a lot more depth, going into different directions and so on.
Tons.
And so it's like, okay,
tons.
you guys can't handle the basic version of the argument that we present. What are you going to do when we keep going deeper? Not in the Zut sense, but what are you going to do when we keep going deeper?
Especially because, and I felt bad. Jake actually didn't know why you were pressing him on this during your debate, right? He said, it doesn't seem like this is really that related to the debate that we're having. I don't understand why this is related to the Islamic dilemma, but I'll still answer it, I guess, right? Trying to throw it off. And he also did the same thing with the debate he did with God Logic recently, where God Logic is pressing him. He's like, well, I don't see how this is really that related to the Islamic dilemma. Like, I think Muslim Dawah guys are not actually ready for moving past the surface level of the Islamic dilemma.
Well, they can't deal with the surface level.
Yeah, they can't. They can't even make it past that. So they're still trying to figure that out because, again, you can't, because it's actually a sound dilemma. But besides the point, as they're seeing that we're like moving into even deeper layers, because, again, Islam is not sound across the board. It's not just not sound textually, but as Stan argued in his really good video on the Bayesian form of it, right? In a philosophical sense, especially in a probabilistic sense, it's not really sound or trustworthy. And if you consider my version of the death of Allah with those 100 dilemmas, in a philosophical and theological sense, it's just not a sound faith. So it doesn't matter which way you're going after it, right? It doesn't matter because you're just going to end up realizing that it just doesn't work. And that's the fullness of that
you just did, man.
Right there. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah. Sorry. There it is.
Now I don't know how to get back to normal once what if I do this? Nope, that didn't work.
Hey, I'm back. That's good.
Hang on. All right.
I'm gone.
Hang on. Okay, if I click off of this, what's that do? All right, now if I click on the, I'm getting good, man.
Nice.
Legend status. So, yeah, we went through 7 dilemmas. 6 of those are in your book, but you got 94 more dilemmas. Look, man, you just have to start making a video out of each one.
I will. I really do think it'd be kind of fun just to show each dilemma in a video and say, all right, how would Muslims deal with this? Especially because the first 50 are camp specific. So I think I have 10 for Athari and then 10 for Ashari. And it's a good way if somebody just wants to learn, hey, what do these different camps of Islam believe? First half of the book just kind of tells you basic summaries and stuff like that. The second half, though, is just universal dilemmas. They're supposed to be dilemmas that apply for any Muslim based off Tawhed and immutability. Like those two things, Tawhed and immutability, doesn't take much. Don't got to have a PhD or a master's or anything in philosophy. Really basic stuff. Allah's immutability and his Tawhed, and the fact that Allah wills things in accordance with his nature, those 3 facts destroy Islam. That's all you need. 3 facts, and you can get about 50-ish dilemmas for the second half of the book. And obviously, if you add more attributes of Allah, then you get a lot more than the 50 that I made for the second half. But I'm not trying to go insane quite yet, because then that'll be a 500 dilemma book.
Nice. What did Muhammad receive better, the Al-Zut or the Quran? The Al-Zut.
Well,
based on what it says about, Jibreel in the cave and so on, those could be similar. We don't know. Thanks for all you do, David. Yeah, happy to do it. Israel analog. Simba is Jacob. Scar isn't in pride. Well, who's Scar?
He's Ishmael. I don't know.
Islamic dilemma is solved. Quran confirms the Bible, and Bible is not corrupted. Discrepancies are due to Quran misinterpretation. Come to Jesus Christ. Yeah, we've in the past, I've made videos which are basically It's the same thing over and over again. They use an argument, we apply the argument to them, and they instantly reject the argument and say it's stupid, even though it's their argument. We just turned it on them. But one of those things is, but when they say, "Oh yeah, Jesus was a Muslim and his followers were Muslims, and why don't they, why didn't this stuff line up?" Well, it was all corrupted. So what evidence do you have? Well, later on, this guy said that it's true, and so on. So. But if you're just going to say this person is this thing and you have no evidence for it, and when the evidence doesn't line up with you, you just say, well, the evidence has been corrupted. Well, you could do that with anything, right?
Easily.
Yeah. So I've done that with Muhammad. I made a video. I believe in Muhammad, and but I believe he was a devout Trinitarian Christian. And after he died, some bad people entered, and then they corrupted the message and so on. They corrupted it. And suddenly Muslims find that reasoning insanely stupid. Like they find it really, really stupid. But this right here, we might need to start pushing this. And we might, in order to show them what they do as far as picking and choosing. Oh, we agree with this verse in the Bible, so that's good. But this verse, no, we don't agree with that, so that's been corrupted. We'll just take all the verses in the Quran that agree with the Torah and the gospel that we have, and all the Islamic dilemma verses, and we'll say everything else that contradicts the Bible has been corrupted. And we'll say that that's the best explanation for what went on.
I actually did a video on that like a year and a half ago. I made a little TikTok short or an Instagram short, and it was me arguing like a Muslim, but in the Christian sense. So I said, did you know that Muhammad was actually a Christian? And then I say, notice how Muhammad prayed bowing down to the ground, which is what early Christians did way before Islam was around. And then Muhammad even called Jesus the Word of God, which is clearly a reference to John's Gospel. But sadly, parts of the original writing of Muhammad was corrupted by Abu Bakr, who is making an analog for Paul, right? And so I was like, but in reality, we know.
In mine, I said Uthman.
Uthman?
Yeah, and that we have hints of what really happened when he burned all the manuscripts of the Quran. This was him actually like destroying all the evidence and then putting out his new version. And I even came up with like Uthman was he was an evil person who wasn't even really a companion, but he came in there and pretended to go along with Muhammad's Christian message until he became more and more powerful, until he was the actual new ruler, and then he used his power to take over and destroy the originals and impose a new Islamic book and so on. What's amazing is when you tell that to a Muslim, they just instantly, what? That's so stupid. And they don't realize I'm making fun of how you argue with the Bible. Yes, this is exactly how stupid you sound to us. But somehow you just turn that off when you're talking, and you don't care how stupid you sound. But then the moment, and we've seen this over and over again today and in the previous live stream, it's when Muslims will make an argument, and all Avery kept doing over and over again was Jake would give his argument and Avery would flip it back and use the exact same argument about the Quran, and then suddenly Jake would instantly reject the argument and think that it's really, really stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just going back to the old TikTok video just to look at the comments from the Muslims when I made the video. And they're like, one said, Muhammad never said he wrote the Quran. Muhammad didn't describe Jesus. Allah did. You have a dumb arguments. And the next one, Jawad Hussein said, prove it then. Prove that Muhammad was a Christian. And each of the Muslims in the comments are getting really, really angry. And he said, if you accept Prophet Muhammad, then that means that you must be a Muslim. And they didn't get my argument. So I was like, it's kind of weird when you use an argument from Muslims and they don't understand. I don't actually know where that comes from. How do you not self-reflect? Like, that's a pretty
that's probably the biggest
right?
problem. Well, definitely one of the biggest problems in Islam is just complete lack of self-reflection.
Yeah, but that's like a pretty basic human ability. Like the average person, I'm not even talking like, advanced theory of mind. Like, oh, I can imagine what it's like to be somebody else. No, like just basic self-reflection. If I have a standard, am I holding to that same standard? You just don't see that in Islam. It's weird. It makes conversations very annoying because you want to be patient with people, but goodness, they really know how to test your patience.
It's pretty rough, man. Pretty rough.
Yeah.
Right. Final thoughts on everything. Everyone, I've got a link to David S.'s channel in the description and also to his book. We went through 6 dilemmas from his book. He's got way more.
Yeah, that's
Should
right.
have done 99. The 99 dilemmas of the 99 dilemmas of a law.
I was thinking about it because the original version, actually, my original book cover did say 99 Islamic dilemmas. But then I saw one thing from a live stream, and I got like one comment from a Muslim, and it just made me a little bit extra angry. So I decided, no, I'm gonna put that one extra. It's all it took, just like that one little bit. But this was great. This is a good chance to be able to show that these Islamic dilemmas do work, even in like professional debate settings. Muslims are just not really prepared for Tawhed and Islamic theology being pressed. So use that. Use that in conversation. I've had a lot of conversations with Muslims where they will just always go back to Tawhed. And I'm like, yeah, about that. You really shouldn't. There's no peace in that. There's no assurance in that. And your God can't even create. And Muslims are like, what do you mean our God can't even create? And I'm like, it's the 50th dilemma in my book. It's like right the second half, part 2 starts. And I explain how Allah can't even create because Allah doesn't see relationship or being related to another thing as a good thing. And Muslims are like, well, you believe in a shampoo bottle, 3-in-1, right? So they'll always go back to that. But this is a good way to slowly help Muslims realize that you can't go back to that final leg. Maybe you were told Muhammad's a good guy, but now, D Wood and AP and a bunch of other people show you that's wrong. Well, at least I know the Quran is preserved. All right, Islamic dilemma has obviously been showing you that that's not the case. All these Muslims keep on falling back on all these different live streams, all these different channels to the Trinity. To Tawhed. And they always say the Trinity makes no sense. Therefore, Tawhed is true. I'm like, no. The Trinity actually makes sense of reality. So Christians, start learning to argue against Tawhed. Start learning to argue for the Trinity. Because once you knock that leg down that Muslims are trying to stand on, it's always their last leg. From now on, spend the next week watching live streams on David's channel, IP's channel, and just look how many times when Muslims are pushed through these dilemmas, they always say, well, it doesn't matter. The Trinity doesn't make sense. Watch. And then realize, once we knock this leg down, they have nothing left to stand upon unless they stand upon the gospel. And thank God our book has the real gospel. Thank God.
We're about to I have to actually move thanks to some TikTok jihadis. So I've been waiting until we do that to set this up for multi-person live streams with multiple cameras and stuff like that. I have all the equipment, I have it all. I'm just not setting it up when I'm just going to have to take it down again real quick. But wanted to get Anthony here. It definitely won't be every week because I know he does lots of stuff, but I'm going to get him to agree to show up every week. He's not traveling for something else, but maybe we just need to make it like Trinity versus Tawhed Tuesday or something like that and just keep going on it just over and over and over again.
Yeah, Tawhed Tuesday sounds awesome.
Live call-in shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd love to, especially with Anthony. Anthony's fun.
Yep. All right, man. Well, we'll do some stuff, man. We'll do some stuff. All right, everyone. Link to David S.'s book on Amazon in the description. You should go ahead and grab that. If you wanted to do something, if you're thinking, what? I don't need 100 dilemmas or something like that. I'd go through and find like your favorite one and just start using that. Find your favorite 1, 2, 3 or something like that and start using them on social media with Muslims. Guess what?
Yeah.
I can guarantee, we talked about them only thinking on the superficial level. They're not going to be ready for it. And you want to kind of use it to kind of push them to think more deeply about these things and so on. So I'd encourage you to use it like that. If you're not the sort of person who's going to go and start using all 100, find a good one that you like, because these are not normal arguments. They're they're becoming familiar with the Islamic dilemma. They still can't answer it. And so guess what? It's good to give them more stuff to deal with because they're really struggling to deal with stuff right now. All right. I'll be live again tomorrow with Giant DOC at 5 p.m. and we'll be checking out Chris's discussion with Jake on the Islamic dilemma.
Poor Jake's getting cooked everywhere. Holy moly.
Yeah, poor Jake. I don't know how. I mean, he attacked everyone. He attacked all the Dawah guys and then gave them limitless ammunition for saying that he sucks and needs to retire.
Yeah.
What a brilliant plan. What a brilliant plan. He attacked everyone else until he's supposedly the last man standing and then destroys himself. Brilliant. It's like Malik. It's like Malik did the same thing, but in a completely different way. He just destroyed all the Dawah guys. They're all evil. I'm the only one. Oh, now look how evil I am, and I'll launch the biggest campaign of Quran desecration the world has ever seen. These guys are tactical geniuses. Tactical geniuses. I'm glad they're on Islam's side and not ours with this stuff.
Although I pray someday they repent.
I pray that they repent and are saved. I pray that. With that said, with their tactics, I'm glad they are not on our side using those tactics.
Yeah, sure. That's true. Jake denying Tawhed in one debate. That's classic. Good stuff, Jake. Love
classic. All right. I'll catch y'all tomorrow.